"Leona! Leona!" the call rang out throughout the garden. A blue-eyed girl named Leona turned around at the call. Another girl excitedly told her that the minister had brought a distinguished guest. The dish was ready, but she did not know what drink to serve. Leona thought, if the minister brought a guest at this time, then it only meant one thing. "A guest from Dongguk," she asked the girl, and she was surprised at how she knew everything. Leona replied that red wine should be enough and asked what about food, since pork should never be served to a guest from Dongguk. And since the food was already prepared, Leona volunteered to carry everything herself, causing admiration for the fact that she knew everything, even though they arrived at the palace at the same time. "Leona, you are amazing, as if you see the future." These words brought a smile to the girl's face. Of course, because this is not the first time she has experienced this. She is Leona, a lifelong servant of the imperial family of the Hamel Empire. Hamel is the only great empire of the continent, the unshakable sun, the ruler of the land. In this imperial family flows the power of the Guardian. As long as the empire with the power of the Guardian rules, no one can bring this country to its knees. But the sun burned too brightly. In her past life, the sun had swallowed up everything in the empire, and she was the sinner who fueled its flames. Before, she did not understand that the purpose of her life was His Highness. The resounding slap was accompanied by loud curses. "Pitiful woman! How dare a vile, illegitimate child bear the name Felberov?" the woman shouted at the girl sitting on the floor in front of her. The girl rubbed her sore cheek and raised her blue eyes. "How dare you raise your eyes to me? Your mother taught you that." The woman's beautiful face was distorted with anger. The girl turned towards the man sitting right there in the room who was calmly reading a newspaper. As expected, there was no reaction from him. Her father, Ace Felber, had a talent for handling money despite being a simple baron. He amassed a fortune comparable to that of a count. "Money is the most valuable thing in the world," he said. Moreover, he directly told his daughter that he was not interested in anything useless, even if it was his own child. To them, she was nothing more than a nuisance, not family at all. Even her own father treated her like another item on his inventory list. Something that has no value because she is not pretty, just an ordinary girl with brown hair like those you see on the street. Ordinary hair? Ordinary blue eyes? The face was neither exceptionally ugly nor particularly beautiful. An illegitimate child from an unremarkable home, someone with no investment value, and if she does nothing, she will eventually be sold for next to nothing. Leona was well aware of her situation, so she secretly eavesdropped on her brother's lessons in order to get an education. And at night, she would secretly leave the house to do routine work for a few coins. And soon she had accumulated a certain amount of gold coins. But that wasn't enough. Her father would never consider her worthy of investing money in such a situation. Leona then began selling old toys that her brothers had used when they were younger, and also altered and sold clothes that the Baroness had thrown out. Once she has saved enough money, she will invest it in a food brokerage house and increase her wealth. In the end, the girl collected quite an impressive amount. One day, Leona came to her father with documents, a purchase and payment agreement. She explained that the land in the Felber's holdings was barren and unsuitable for growing crops, and she saw this as a good opportunity for the estate, so she invested in it. While her father was reading the documents, Leona was sure that he would finally recognize her. But the more the man read, the more he frowned, and in the end he sighed heavily to Leona's surprise. And then before her eyes, with one sharp movement, he tore up all the papers. He dreamed of a higher title, but he only knew how to make money for her father, who remained a baron all his life. Her abilities meant nothing. "Little girl," showing off little tricks, "I have arranged your marriage, so stop fooling around and get ready for the wedding," the man said, adding that the groom was the merchant he had already mentioned. Leona was indignant because that man already had 8 children, and they were all her age. But she quickly fell silent because she noticed something. The father sat calmly and looked at her, not a single muscle on his face twitching. Looking into his eyes, Leona realized he just wanted to get rid of her because she was not a useful daughter. Because she was a bastard, because she was a woman, because she wasn't beautiful, because she had no real power, just someone who was used and abandoned. But was that her fault? No, it's because her father is a heartless monster who has neither blood nor tears. "Let's make a deal, father. I'll give you money, 50 times the initial payment," the girl said confidently. The man was surprised where she got such a huge amount of money. "I will become a servant. Send me to the imperial palace." She ignored his question. But still, her words hit the nail on the head. The Hamel Empire only recruits servants from noble families. After taking an oath of lifelong servant, she will not be able to marry, and her family name will be erased. In addition, she will receive a huge amount and will not need a dowry. This is what he is thinking about. She will no longer allow herself to be controlled. She will gain power so that no one can trample her again. This is how Leona entered the imperial palace. At that time, chaos reigned in the palace. The first prince, who was the heir, died suddenly of pneumonia. The second prince, who was at the border, returned and took the title of heir. The following year, he was betrothed to the chancellor's daughter, and on her arrival, she caused a violent storm in the palace. Viota Helisian is a woman of dazzling beauty, who enjoys the favor of the emperor, and also a concubine with ambitions, who used her youth and beauty to quickly rise to the position of empress. The first time she saw her, Leona realized that this woman would never stop at just this, and if she stayed by her side, she would also achieve a lot. Viota was spending time with the emperor when she noticed something unusual. "Oh my God, the throne is decorated with peonies, Your Majesty," she noted out loud. And then she added with a smile that she would also like to have such a throne in her palace. To decorate the imperial throne with peonies is a sign that someone wants to follow her, the mistress of the peony palace. And when the empress asked who left these flowers here, Leona confidently answered that it was she. "The peonies bloomed more beautifully than all the other flowers in the garden, and I decided that they would stand on an even more majestic throne," the maid explained with a smile. The empress smiled back, understanding everything. "Your Majesty, I have a small request." She turned to the emperor, who was ready to fulfill whatever she wished. "Give me this girl." The woman extended her index finger. The empress's thin, graceful finger pointed straight at Leona. So the girl ended up in the Peony Palace and became the empress's right hand. After that, she destroyed all her enemies with slander, deception, and ruthless plans. Leona seized control of the imperial administration and turned Viota, a former concubine, into the true ruler of the inner court. One day the empress called her maid to her private chambers. "Leona, thanks to your sharp mind, everything went smoothly. I can finally rest easy," the woman began, and the girl thanked her for the honor. But the empress's next words made Leona raise her eyes in surprise. "I want to ask you for a favor. The crown princess is expecting a child. She is 3 months pregnant," the empress began with a smile. "Get rid of the child in her womb." Her command came out of the blue. Leona gained great power through the favor of Empress Viota. The taste was indescribably sweet. What was wrong with pushing others aside to secure a position for yourself? How many people in this palace did not do the same? The girl thought. She would not allow anyone to treat her carelessly and would do everything possible to achieve more. Prepare poison and secretly send it to the crown princess's palace. The crown princess's child must be killed. The empress summed up her order. Leona silently agreed, although something was bothering her. But the overthrow of the crown prince is only a matter of time. Is it really necessary to hunt for the child in such a situation? She asked anyway. The empress replied that she loved certainty, would not leave even the slightest germ of unrest. Every drop of imperial blood must be destroyed. That's why she personally got the poison. But these words only sowed more doubts in Leona's soul. She could not understand what kind of crime an unborn child could commit. Although the crown prince is being overthrown for political reasons, both the crown prince and crown princess are good people. The crown prince grew up outside the palace from an early age and did not like being bound by strict rules, but on the battlefield he was an outstanding commander. The crown princess, even from her exalted position, was a person who treated those below her with kindness. Poisoning a child in the womb would also affect the mother, but Leona really didn't want to harm the child. The empress asked why the maid did not answer her. "Just don't say that you won't do it," the empress asked in a tone full of metal. And Leona suddenly realized that she simply had no other choice. In the end, she sent the poison to the crown princess, but she was so uneasy that she could do nothing else and only prayed to God that the poison would not work. Despite her desperate hope, the poison mercilessly took the life of the crown princess, leaving the life of the baby. The baby in her womb barely survived. But the Dr. Huangyi said that this child would not live long. Leona was one of the few who visited the baby, and she came again to see the imperial heir. How illogical after she killed the crown princess with her own hands. But if she doesn't see the imperial heir, her chest will continue to tighten. When the crown princess passed away, Viota began making plans to eliminate the crown prince and the heir. Even the emperor showed no concern for the dying child. The heir who should have been blessed was forgotten by everyone. While Leona was pondering over the crib, the sleeping child began to cry. And this sound instantly resonated in the girl's heart. "Your Highness, you are in pain. Maybe I should give you a massage." The worried maid rushed to him. Leona secretly called the wet nurse and Huang Gi to take care of the heir, but the child's powers never returned. At that moment, the baby opened his eyes and grabbed the girl's finger with his little hands. Leona froze, feeling something she had never felt before. The child's eyes were as green as the crown prince's and just as captivating. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. The death of Her Highness, the condition of the heir. It's all her fault. Leona knows she doesn't deserve it. But still, despite everything, how can this child be so beautiful? "Your Highness, only you, no matter what happens, I will protect you," Leona whispered, hugging the child. Thus, 5 months passed since the birth of the heir. The Empress appointed her son, the Emperor's third son, as crown prince, and removed the second prince. The deposed prince was exiled to a remote area, but he suddenly disappeared without a trace, about the time the shadow of ruin began to fall on the empire. The once wise emperor suddenly lost his clarity of mind, turning into a puppet dependent on the Empress. The greedy Empress was busy squeezing blood from the people. Her reign was filled with incomprehensible mistakes. She introduced reckless tax policies, carried out extravagant projects, and surrounded herself with sycophants. The people's indignation was about to burst out. This was noticed by all the inhabitants of the imperial palace, and they were seriously alarmed. Right in front of the palace, the townspeople held another protest action. Since the decree was issued to execute the protesters, the demonstrations began to subside for a while, but in general, the state of the nation only got worse. Leona didn't say anything about it, but no words were needed. However, it's strange. Viota may be greedy, but she's smart, and not the type to make such reckless mistakes. Ever since she made her son the crown prince, she doesn't even pay attention to him. Something's wrong. "Maid!" came an excited cry. Covering her thoughts, the priest was hurrying towards Leona. "Leona, it's urgent. The imperial heir." The man was very sad. And the girl understood everything without words. At the age of 1 year and 3 months, the imperial heir died. After some time, the girl was sitting on the ground in front of a small cross. Behind her stood the same priest, and there was no one else. "I don't know how this will sound to you, but the heir lived much longer than we expected, and it's all thanks to you," the man said. And he suggested to the silent maid to simply send him away in peace. Without turning around, Leona asked if the deposed prince had been found, and was told that no, but they were looking for him everywhere. When a member of the royal family dies, black flags are flown at his residence as a sign of mourning, and he is buried in the royal cemetery. But the imperial heir, born of a deposed prince and forgotten by all, is a different case. Even in death, he was not given a place of rest. So Leona buried him under an ancient tree in the garden of the crown prince's palace, in the very place where the deposed prince often rested, in the hope that he would feel warmth as in his father's arms. And that was the end of it. While the girl was in a stupor, the empire was falling apart. The Allied forces surrounded the gates, everyone run, cries of horror were heard everywhere, and the fires were getting stronger. Leona sought power and stained her hands with countless vile deeds, and this is her retribution. Drowning in the mud without even realizing it, she was stupidly happy that she had power. How shameful! If she had known that everything would end like this, she would not have lived, blinded by greed. Another one is hiding under the tree. There was a scream and the sound of approaching footsteps. If by some chance she is born again, she will never live the same as before. Not a life where she hurts and steals from others, but a life where she protects and nurtures. Yes, if she is given another chance, she will do everything differently. "I will live for you, heir." These were the last words of the girl before she was mortally wounded. And the next moment, Leona opened her eyes with a scream. "What's going on? Where is she? This is hell!" A bunch of questions were swarming in my head, and my heart was beating wildly. She struggled to sit up, feeling her head splitting with pain. Holding her throbbing head, the girl noticed that she was not alone in the room. But when she realized who it was, her surprise knew no bounds. It was Miranda, Leona's roommate and friend since she was a trainee maid. And this room is the very first room she was assigned to after entering the palace. But what is it? A clearly recognizable sound of a bell was heard, and Leona froze, listening to this sound. The palace bell, which announces the time, struck 5 times, which means it is now 5 in the morning. The girl, still in her nightgown, jumped up and ran out into the street. While she was running, she heard people talking in the street, which meant that the people in the palace were safe, but then it turns out that she herself was alive. Right in front of her, 2 maids were walking and talking. But as soon as they saw Leona, they fell silent and stopped. Leona herself froze in surprise, forgetting that she was on the street in her nightgown. How can you go out dressed like that? The girls were indignant. If she were caught, it would be a disaster. Doesn't she know that they, the maids, are checked not only for their duties, but also for their behavior? But Leona interrupted them and asked what year and day it was according to the imperial calendar. He stunned the maids beyond belief with his questions. But Leona herself was the most shocked when she learned that it was now the year 530, according to the imperial calendar. She realized that she had gone back in time 4 years ago. Thanking her for the information and ignoring the girl's cries that she would get into trouble, Leona started running again. The girl ran, quickly moving her bare feet and out of breath from the speed. And she didn't stop until a large tree appeared in front of her. Here, she buried him right here. Leona began to dig a hole under the tree. The heir must be here. But all that appeared before her was a large empty hole. So, now it really is still 4 years before those events. Then, could it be that everything that had happened up to this moment was just a dream? But Leona couldn't believe it. It was all too real. Suddenly, the girl screamed, feeling a sharp pain in her stomach. Lifting her clothes, she discovered a huge, still fresh scar on her stomach. It looked like it was from a knife stab at the end, when she was dying. It can't be. Could she really have gone back to the past after dying? This discovery shocked the girl. She simply looked at the breaking dawn. And the most important question hung in the air: why? "Hey, who are you?" a male voice interrupted her thoughts. Its owner stood right in front of Leona, and she realized with surprise that she recognized him. A tall, handsome young man stood in front of the girl, waiting for an answer to his question. "The maid of this palace?" he asked, still not waiting for an answer to the first question. Deep green eyes looked at the girl, waiting for an answer. "Your Highness, Crown Prince Carmine Rudel," the girl said in fear and shuddered, realizing that she had made a mistake in saying this, because the previous crown prince, the first prince, had just died, and the second prince had only recently returned. The young man was surprised, not knowing what to answer to that. "Yes, Crown Prince, he has not been officially appointed yet, but it doesn't sound so bad. But seeing how you have brought my palace garden to such a state, have you hidden some treasure in front of this tree?" asked the Crown Prince. Leona winced again, realizing he was referring to the hole he had dug nearby. The girl tried to explain herself somehow, but her thoughts were confused. Meeting him so suddenly, how could she even explain it? Looking the way she looked now, no matter what she said, he would not believe her. "I beg your pardon, Your Highness the Second Prince." Leona did not think for long and bowed as low as possible. The young man exhaled tiredly, realizing that she was not going to explain anything. "It doesn't matter, I'm not interested, just go back where you belong," he said and turned to leave. Only then did the girl allow herself to raise her head, not believing that he would let her leave just like that. "And also, from now on, do not enter my garden without permission," the prince said, standing half-turned. The girl froze, struck by the metal in his voice, and then she respectfully answered His Majesty that she would remember this, then rushed away headlong, casting a sidelong glance. With his signature relaxed smile and cold eyes, even after his return, the prince is still difficult to deal with. Stopping at a distance, Leona thought that he was still resting in this place. In her past life, he always sat in front of this tree, which is why she buried his descendant there. The girl thought he was her enemy. The Empress's enemy was also her enemy. He was not easy to resist. He had enormous strength and an aura that suppressed others, and even an unwavering will to resist enemy attacks. Because of his presence, the Empress felt threatened and directed all her efforts to eliminate him, so she sacrificed the Crown Prince and the imperial offspring. Soon, when Viota enters the palace, they will overthrow him from the throne again, and when that happens, the empire will also collapse. Knowing all this, can she just watch? As she wondered what would have happened to the empire if the Crown Prince had never been overthrown, the girl suddenly froze. The Crown Prince once saved the country by winning the war. If she protected him, the empire would not collapse, and she would be able to save the emperor's son, too. Now, Leona understood why she was sent to the past. It was a chance given to her by the gods. "No matter what it takes, even if I have to risk my life, I will protect you, Your Highness." The girl smiled. Time went on as usual. Life in the palace continued. Having done her business, Leona returned to the room where Miranda was already waiting for her. The girl held a box in her hands and was very surprised that her friend was nervous with impatience. She asked Leona from the doorway where she had been since the morning because she was worried that she would be late for the morning meeting. "Sorry, Miranda, I just had to take care of something." The girl smiled, and Miranda noticed that she was acting a little strange. But she immediately added that now was not the time for this. They needed to hurry. Today was the day when they would officially become maids, and she was interested in where they would be assigned. Leona asked her to wait and went into the room, and then she casually threw the box on the bed. "Well, everything is ready. Let's go." The girl headed towards the exit. Only Miranda asked in surprise if it was possible to leave everything like that. "This is a memory of your mother, isn't it?" her friend asked timidly. Leona, without turning around, said that everything was fine and the box was empty. These words surprised Miranda, but she said nothing more. All the palace interns gathered in the back garden area of the servants' quarters. The girls whispered to each other, nervous and wondering where they would end up. And only Leona maintained an impenetrable calm. She looked around carefully. There was a restless, excited atmosphere around. Everything was exactly as she remembered, and now it seemed to her that she had definitely returned to the past. "It's quite noisy. I guess everyone is nervous about their assignments. I'm very nervous too, Leona. And you?" Miranda asked her friend. The girl replied that she was also worried. Then Miranda noted that she shouldn't worry, because she would serve as a maid all her life, so she would be assigned to a good place, and temporary maids are usually assigned to complex departments with a lot of responsibilities. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," Leona said confidently. Miranda didn't hear, so she asked again, but at that moment there was a demand for silence in the garden. 3 women approached them majestically. All the girls whispered in surprise, wondering who it was, but also noticing that one of the women was wearing a vest of a color they had never seen before. And only Leona understood what was happening. In the imperial palace, the status of maids and servants is distinguished by the color of their vests. The heads of each department wear orange vests, and the staff maids wear white vests. Trainee maids do not wear vests, but have yellow sashes around their waists, and only one person is allowed to wear a light blue vest. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Odell, the head maid in charge of your management and supervision." The head maid introduced herself, smiling. And immediately she caused surprised and at the same time admiring exclamations from the crowd of maids. Odell liked the reaction and added with a wider smile that she was there today for a special occasion, as they had all been trained and officially appointed as maids. As everyone knows, the position of a maid is an official rank in the empire. Their role is to serve the imperial family. Therefore, from now on, as members of the palace, you must bear responsibility, her voice carried. But Leona no longer listened, knowing that her speech would last a long time. The girl recalled the appointment ceremony with mixed feelings. Trainee maids are officially appointed as maids in the 2nd month after joining the palace. During the ceremony, they receive a white sash and a maid's badge, after which they are assigned to their respective departments. Last time, Leona was assigned to a department far from power. But she bribed her way into the emperor's palace because she was determined to reach the center of power. "Intern Leona, step forward," a voice was heard and the girl responded. She walked up to the head maid Hannah and bowed in greeting. The head maid seemed stern, but when she saw Leona, she smiled and greeted her back. She congratulated Leona on being promoted to court maid and handed her a sash and badge, for which she thanked her. This morning, Leona visited the head maid Hannah's room. Since today was the appointment ceremony, her department had already been decided. But in her past life, Leona learned that the appointment could be changed with a bribe, but this time she has a different goal: to protect the empire. Thinking that she had chosen the right place to go, Leona returned to the place. "Where you were assigned, I was assigned to the Crown Prince's palace." Miranda shared her joy, not believing that this was reality. Leona smiled and showed her badge, saying that she too had been assigned to the Crown Prince's palace and that they would now be together until she retired and left the palace. Her badge was hastily assembled and looked a little flimsy, but it would do. A good start for this life. Little by little, she would change her destiny. Long ago, in ancient times, giants lived on the continent. With 2 pairs of arms and skin as hard as stone, they hunted humans for sport and devoured them. People suffering in agony cried out to the gods. Hearing their cries, God chose a guardian to save humanity. God gave him 5 mighty black lions for protection, and a white sword that can cut through the skin of giants. While the keeper was fighting the giants, he was helped by a powerful sorcerer. On the 100th day of their fierce battle, exhausted and covered in blood, the guard received a mortal wound. The witch who loved the guardian threw herself into the lake, sacrificing her life. At that moment, the entire lake turned red, and to everyone's amazement, the fallen guardian was resurrected. The revived guardian gave off a fresh, invigorating scent that spread across the continent, reviving the dead nature and stripping the giants of their strength. Weakened by the scent and power of the white sword, the giants fell and fled to the land of ice. The keeper then built a towering wall that reached to the heavens, ensuring that the giants would never set foot on this land again. Over time, the descendants of the keeper built a palace on the shore of the lake and founded a state. Now this state is the Hamel Empire. The next day after the distribution at the Crown Prince's palace, Leona and Miranda showed up at their duty station and greeted everyone, introducing themselves as new recruits. But the answer they received was silence and wary, displeased looks. Miranda was confused, but Leona understood their reaction. "Don't stand there, follow me," one of the maids told them. She led them to one of the doors and, knocking, announced that new maids had arrived. The girls entered the room and appeared before the head maid. The maid who brought them told them to pay their respects, because before them was Lady Sonia, the head maid who looked after the Crown Prince's palace. "We welcome you, head maid. I am Leona." The girl introduced herself, bowing, and Miranda did the same. However, in response to their greeting, they received only a prolonged silence. The head maid did not return their greeting, and the lower servants could not straighten their backs until their superiors had acknowledged their greeting. "Unworthy, pitiful people have entered the Crown Prince's palace. It is all because of my lack of virtue," the seated woman said. And it dawned on Leon that she must think they got in here with a bribe. How can Lady Sonia be to blame for this? Everyone in this palace knows that Lady Sonia is always fair in her judgments. The voice of another maid was heard. While she was saying that if there was any guilt, it lay with those who were involved in corruption, Miranda whispered to Leona what was going on. The girl didn't seem to be worried at all, unlike her friend. Leon found it funny that Justice and Sonia were put on the same level. Sonia is the head maid in charge of the maids in the Crown Prince's palace. In her past life, she was a scheming snake who sold information about Crown Prince Leon, Viota's right-hand man. She was notorious for her cruelty towards the weak, with rumors circulating that she tortured lower-ranking maids and pocketed their severance pay, and that she secretly punished her personal maid. At that moment, Sonia called the maid Ellie, and she immediately responded in fear. Leona realized that this was the very same personal maid of the head of the maids. "Ellie, get them out of my sight," Sonia ordered. The young girl replied that she understood the order. She quietly told the girls that she would teach them all their duties and told them to follow her quietly. Ellie led them to the back garden of the Crown Prince's palace. "This is your new assignment. From now on, your job is to clean here. You don't have to attend the morning roll call. Just come here and start working every day," Ellie explained. The girls realized with horror that they had to clean the huge area of the garden, just the two of them. Having decided that she had fulfilled her duties, Ellie was about to leave, but was stopped by a question. "I got the impression that the back garden was run by the service staff, not the maids," Leona noted. "So why are they, like maids, assigned to look after him?" Ellie froze at the girl's straightforwardness, not knowing what to answer. Leona always knew that Ellie was a timid servant, weak and always holding back. She was probably depressed by Sonia's bullying. Then Leona covered up the rumors with her own hands in order to attract Sonia to her side, but ruling through fear will only repeat the past. Ellie listened in confusion as they, as new recruits, knew nothing about the internal affairs of the palace. "So, Lady Ellie, could you explain the situation to us?" Leona asked in a friendly tone, since she had to change first. To her surprise, Ellie was delighted and began to explain to the girls that the second prince had returned to the palace, and since he was soon to take up the post of crown prince, he had decided to settle in the palace in advance, and he had also taken a horse with him. The maid dumped a pile of necessary information on the girls. All they had to do was remember it, which is what Leona did, delving into everything that was happening. In the past, the Crown Prince also brought his prized horse to the imperial palace. This animal was much larger and stronger than ordinary horses, and also vicious and aggressive, often destroying the back garden and threatening the servants. The housekeeping department must have protested that caring for the horse was not their responsibility, and the housemaids department must have refused to take charge of the back garden. And just at that time, new recruits arrived, accused of corruption, so Mrs. Sonia decided to dump this task on you, Ellie finished. Miranda was horrified by the mention of corruption, but Leona calmed her friend down with one movement and turned to Ellie. "Thank you for your kind explanation. It was very helpful," the girl smiled. So much so that Ellie was at a loss and could only answer that there was nothing to be thankful for. and unable to cope with her feelings, she hastily said that it was time for her to go. Miranda honestly didn't understand what was going on here. I was so happy when we were assigned to the Crown Prince's palace, and now, as soon as we arrived, the hardest work fell on us. Leona sighed sadly. Miranda suggested that there must have been some misunderstanding, which earned her friend a surprised look. Miranda is a temporary maid. Unlike a lifelong servant, she will not serve in the palace forever. Her dream is to return to her hometown, having received severance pay, and have a beautiful wedding. But in her past life, she was caught up in a power struggle orchestrated by Leona. Her face was disfigured, she was falsely accused and thrown into the imperial prison. Leona secretly helped her escape, gave her money, and sent her out of the palace, and after that she never saw her again. She sometimes thought about Miranda, wondered if she had the wedding she dreamed of, but soon buried these thoughts because she was not ready to meet her again. In this life, Leona wants to keep her friend close to her and protect her, but from the very beginning she only brings harm. While Leona was thinking hard, Miranda, who had also been silent for a while, coughed slightly. And then with a bright smile she said that it didn't matter. The main thing was that they weren't kicked out of the palace, and if they worked hard, the misunderstanding would resolve itself. So let's just try and do the best we can, she told Leona. The girl, feeling guilty about everything that was happening, was surprised for a moment, and then smiled back at her friend, and thought that she was not going to give up so easily. Yes, let's work together, she replied to her friend with the same cheerful smile. If Leona wants to protect the Crown Prince, she must get rid of Sonia, because she cannot leave the one who sold information about him without control. Besides, the expulsion of the corrupt head maid will create a good precedent for the other maids, thus giving her and Miranda an advantage. Miranda wiped beads of sweat from her forehead and wearily noted that she had just finished her morning work. And then she became sad that because of the piled-up work, she didn't have time to have lunch on time. But at that moment, Leona came up to her and called her friend in a very cheerful voice. The girl had a simple set of products in her hands. When Miranda asked where she got the bread and apples, Leona replied that she got them after whining to Zelda. "As expected, Leona, you are the best," her friend rejoiced. It had been 9 days since they had entered the Crown Prince's palace. They had not had a chance to rest once. Managing the garden was hard work. At dawn, the girls had to work until late at night without food just to finish the job. In addition, due to the power struggle between the senior maids, Leona and Miranda often took on jobs that did not belong to them. They had had almost no proper food all these days and only slept a few hours, so it was physically exhausting, and Leona thought that she had to find a way out. It was for this reason that the girl took advantage of the moment and headed into the inner rooms of the palace. There, Leona called out to a woman named Zelda, whom she really wanted to talk to, who was also the supervisor of the maid department. She gave her name and explained that she had recently joined the Crown Prince's palace. "We can talk," Leona asked confidently. While eating a juicy apple, she reminisced about her conversation with the head of the department. For several days, Leona visited Zelda, helped her with her work, and even shed a few tears. The woman was always too kind, so it was easy to use her to one's advantage. Leona used to think that people who were weak in emotions were stupid and pathetic, but if it weren't for Zelda's kindness, she and Miranda would have been hungry again today. Looking back, she was the most pathetic one. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by her friend's surprised exclamation. Looking in the same direction as Miranda, Leona herself was very surprised. In the meadow near a small stream, there was the stately, beautiful horse of the Crown Prince. "It looks like His Highness's horse has come to dig the canal again," Miranda stated with disappointment. All this time, the animal refused to drink the water that people gave him. Instead, he digs canals in the garden to find water to drink. In the process, he tramples flowers and trees, leaving the garden in ruins, which is why this place is gradually falling into disrepair. No matter how much time he and Miranda spent working, by the next morning the garden was in disarray again, and they again had no time to rest. "I guess we'll have to start over," Miranda said sadly. Leona was thinking at the time the Crown Prince's horse was named Nacha. He did not follow anyone except his master, and had already injured the servants who tried to feed and water him. But if they could stop Nacha's rampage, their position in the palace would change. In her past life, Leona collected information about this animal. It comes from the lands of the Katago Tribia Rider tribe in the northwest of the continent. They say that they follow one owner for their entire life once they choose one. And since this is an animal with character, then it is necessary to create suitable conditions for it. Considering that he constantly tramples the flowers, the garden is not suitable for him. And then Leon had an idea. Nacha is a Northwest horse and may be unfamiliar with garden plants due to its origins. Leona told Miranda that she would be back soon, which puzzled her friend, and she promised that it wouldn't take much time. The first emperors of the Hamel Empire claimed dominion over the continent with the help of the Guardian's scent. In these lands, scent was a symbol of power, but over time the scent of the keeper became thinner, and eventually its power disappeared completely. As a result, subsequent emperors tried to replace him by training specialists in working with aromas and monopolizing them in the imperial family. A profession that exists exclusively for the emperor is a perfumer, so the girl went to the Perfume Research Institute, Perfumery. "You are the maid who was looking for me," Leona was called. The girl turned around. She was afraid that this man was not in the palace, but it seemed she was lucky. Standing before her in person was the imperial perfumer Filmago. Thanks to his exceptional skill and dedication, he is destined to be called the King of Perfumes in the future. Although this prestigious role only exists for the emperor, perfumers of the past often wielded enormous influence and power. However, Filmago was different. He stayed away from politics and power, dedicating himself exclusively to the art of fragrance. A man like him will definitely help. "It is a great honor for me to meet you, perfumer. I am Leona, the new maid in the palace of the Crown Prince." The girl introduced herself. When the man asked what brought her here, the girl replied that she had heard that he had traveled a lot, collecting fragrances, so she came for advice about the northwestern region. And then she asked him if he had heard anything about the second prince's favorite horse, from which Phil immediately understood what she wanted. Sitting down on a bench in the garden, Phil asked if she was looking for plants from the northwest region, to which Leona replied in the affirmative. She suspected that the garden plants were not suitable for the second prince's horse. "It's impressive, just think. You noticed the horse's aggression and connected it with the surrounding plants," the perfumer admired. And then, to Leona's dismay, he added that it would be difficult to find northwestern plants in the empire. The environment there was very different from the empire's, making it difficult to grow. But if this is a greenhouse in a carefully tended imperial garden," the man thought, "he has seeds of plants from the northwest border, including several hardy species that can grow here." Leona seized the opportunity and asked if Nasha might like them, to which Phil replied that at least he wouldn't reject them as southeastern plants. The girl was even more surprised when her interlocutor said that her words reminded him of something he had once heard about the Catago horses. Phil handed her a small jar filled with dried plants, and he explained that this is a dried leaf of a plant that grows only in the territory of the Catago. Catago horses have a more sensitive sense of smell, so the smell of this plant is used for training. "Isn't it forbidden to use fragrances outside the imperial court?" Leona asked in surprise, to which the perfumer replied that the Catago tribe had always refused to submit to the empire, so it didn't matter. And if she was going to work in the garden, she would have to deal with the second prince's horse regularly, so she should use it sparingly when things were especially difficult. "If you put dried leaves in a rag and shake it, the horse will obey," the man smiled. After talking with the perfumer, the girl returned to the garden. She managed to get not only the plant seeds, but also dried leaves. If this helps improve Nacha's mood, it will be a relief. Suddenly, Leona heard a shrill scream and some noise. Turning towards the sound, the girl saw the servant defending himself and Nak attacking him. The horse looked overly excited and even aggressive. Leona asked Miranda anxiously what had happened, and the girl stammered as she told her story. While Leona was gone, the servant approached the horse to give it some food, but it simply looked at him angrily. Then the servant got scared and fell on his butt, and the horse, still continuing to look, seemed to be laughing at the clumsy man. The servant must have been angry because he threw a bucket of food at the animal, and then, Miranda said, but it was clear what happened next. Leona's friend was sincerely worried about what they should do in such a situation. After giving Miranda the bag of plants, Leona asked her to move away. "I'll deal with him," the girl said confidently. Nacha began to rear up with a loud neigh, not allowing anyone to get close to him, but Leona slowly but surely approached the raging animal. "Come here, Nacha," she shouted, getting his attention, and waved the sheet. Miranda, like the other servants gathered around, gasped in fear, trying to warn the girl. Nacha, furious to the limit, let out another neigh, more like a battle cry. "What should we do? He will attack her like that." Worried voices were heard and tears appeared in Miranda's eyes. Unable to watch her friend being torn apart, Miranda screamed her name and closed her eyes in fear. But nothing happened. Moreover, it became suspiciously quiet, and the girl timidly opened one eye. The second prince's horse calmed down and even allowed Leona to pet him, the girl, and Natcha stood nearby, causing those around him to ask in surprise who this servant was. Miranda was the first to come to her senses and rushed to ask if she was okay. Before Leona could answer that she was fine, a stern question was heard asking what all the fuss was about. Chief Chamberlain Gerard and Assistant Chamberlain Bartz were heading towards the servants gathered in the garden. But most importantly, Crown Prince Carmine Rudel. The prince never received an answer to his question from the two girls who stood near his horse. Then he ordered Brother to report what had happened. Carmine listened thoughtfully as it seemed that a servant had thrown horse feed at His Highness's horse, causing it to become agitated and go berserk. "You have calmed Natcha down?" the prince asked the surprised Leona directly. The girl tugged at the sheet in her hands restlessly, activating the barely perceptible scent, and then, pressing the fabric to herself, bowed her head and answered in the affirmative. The prince demanded that she raise her head, and then he asked her name, to which the girl respectfully introduced herself. You calmed down and cleaned up the mess, well done. For that you probably want a reward," stated Carmine, offering her to say what she wanted. Everyone present gasped in surprise. But Leona thought that the chance had come so quickly. If it had been the old her, she would have asked for gold and jewels. But now she had changed. "Then, if I may be so bold, please appoint me and the maid Miranda as your highness's personal attendants," the girl asked, once again causing exclamations of surprise from those around her. The second prince's eyes also widened in surprise, and he asked again if this meant that she wanted to serve him personally. Leona confirmed that this was so. She wanted to serve His Highness close by, and she had no other requests. For some time, His Highness silently looked at the servant bowing before him. "If that is what you want," the prince began, but was interrupted by a loud voice. "I cannot allow this. As the head servant, I cannot approve of this," the woman who arrived announced. Sonia indignantly added that they were newcomers who had just entered the palace. How could they serve His Highness if they had not even completed their training at court? Leona listened with displeasure as she said that there were rules and procedures for promotion, and if His Majesty ignored them by appointing new maids as his personal assistants, it would disrupt the order of the palace. "As the manager of the palace, I cannot approve of their promotion, Your Majesty." Sonia finished her speech with a respectful bow. The future crown prince also listened silently to the chief servant, and only at the end did he chuckle skeptically. And then he asked Sonia who was the owner of the palace, from which the woman raised her head in surprise. But as soon as she looked at His Highness, horror was reflected in the woman's eyes. "I asked you who is the master here," the prince repeated, his eyes glowing with green fire. The woman was seriously frightened and, stuttering, said that the owner here was His Highness. Then the young man asked who her master was, to which Sonia also replied that it was His Highness. "If I, your master, make a decision, do I need your approval?" the prince asked with a threat in his voice, causing the maid to immediately answer negatively in fear. "Then shut up," Carmine Rudel snapped, and the woman had no choice but to obey and hope that she would not be punished for her words. The prince, meanwhile, turned to the chief chamberlain, ordering him to grant Leona's request and appoint them as his personal escorts. "I will do so," the man answered respectfully, and Miranda, standing behind him, also said words of gratitude to His Highness. "Thank you, Your Highness." Leona also thanked the prince, casting a barely noticeable glance at the quiet Sonia. Sometime later, in the servants' and maids' meeting room in the Crown Prince's palace, two young men looked into the room, and one of them sighed, saying that everything was complicated. "Bartz, is something wrong?" the other asked him, to which he replied that it was now the middle of a full meeting of all the servants and maids of the Crown Prince's palace, but the atmosphere was terrible. And all because of the newcomers, those brave newcomers who personally asked His Highness to make them his direct servants. As is known, His Highness is already busy with state affairs, preparing for his ascension. He has a grueling schedule from dawn until late at night. So initially, the number of direct maids and servants who were supposed to help him was about 15 to 17 people. But His Highness does not like crowds of people, so he has reduced his retinue to 3 attendants and 1 maid, Bartz said, adding that fortunately, the number of nightly escorts remained unchanged. The current attendants already have limited ability to serve him, and now that new maids are joining them, things are becoming even more difficult, which is why complaints are arising. When asked by his interlocutor whether they could simply be fired, Bartz replied that it was too difficult and that His Highness was not one to go back on his word. and the current maids are resisting this, so the situation is becoming increasingly tense. But even Sonia, the head maid who had already been warned, and Lord Gerard, the chief chamberlain, did not react in any way. Gerard himself was at that very moment wondering whether His Highness would reverse his decision if he asked him to reconsider it, and he decided that no, he would never reverse it. Gerard has served the imperial family for 32 years, ever since he entered the palace at the age of 19, but he still cannot read His Majesty's thoughts. At first glance, he seems generous to his subordinates, but in reality, it is not easy to serve him. He has achieved outstanding results without showing the slightest hint of struggle, and about his extraordinary nature, there are even secret rumors that the death of the first prince is the God's way of making the second prince the true protector of this country. And now His Highness has personally chosen the servant who will be next to him, and Gerard cannot even imagine what lies behind his decision. Thinking thus, the chief chamberlain sighed wearily. Our duty is to devote ourselves entirely to the will of His Highness. There will be no changes in the schedule, he announced to his subordinates. The maids tried to object to this decision, but one look from the man was enough to silence them. For now, we will follow His Majesty's orders and keep a close eye on the maids Leona and Miranda, but if we find any shortcomings in them, we will ask His Highness to reconsider his decision. Gerard finished. And then he moved on to discussing the next issue on the agenda. The Grand Chamberlain made the wise decision to first observe what His Highness's intentions were. And how far is this daring girl willing to go? According to legend, the guardian who defeated the giant nation spent his entire life alone at the lake of the dead sorcerer. The sky god, wanting the guardian to leave a successor, sent a blue falcon. The guardian threw the falcon, stained with its own blood, into a crimson lake. Then the water in the lake disappeared, and at the bottom of the dried-up lake, a baby with the scent of the guardian appeared, and so the second guardian was born. Therefore, the white sword became the symbol of the emperor in the Hamel Empire, and the symbol of the crown prince is the blue falcon. There are knights who wear this blue falcon symbol, the personal guard of the crown prince. The Blue Falcon Squad is a direct squad that acts solely for the crown prince. I'm counting on you, Madame Leona, the young knight smiled dazzlingly. The girl, like her friend, simply looked at the young man. Leona, surprised by such friendliness, remained silent for so long that the man became embarrassed. In her past life, the girl was close to the Empress, and she did not have a good relationship with the Blue Falcon Squad, which is not surprising, because she tried to overthrow the Crown Prince. Therefore, as soon as they saw her, the squad members clenched their teeth in anger, and as soon as they accidentally bumped into her, they looked at her with a gloomy expression, or even cursed, threatening Leona instead of the Empress, and the most striking representative of such people is this man. It's nice to meet you, Deputy Commander of the Blue Falcon Squad, Casey, the girl answered the knight politely. The young man smiled sincerely. He heard about her feat yesterday and thought it was amazing. Even knights were afraid to approach Nacha, but Leona replied that she was just lucky. Luck is also a part of skill. The knight's smile grew even wider. Casey kept saying that they had only just joined and were already personal maids, probably the fastest promotion of maids in history, not noticing the displeased looks from the other girls that he was so friendly and talked too much. By the way, look over there. Casey suddenly pointed the girls in the direction. Down there on the training ground, two men were fighting. And one of them was the second prince, Carmine Rudel. He swung his sword with full force, delivering powerful blows one after another that his opponent could barely hold back. Casey explained that their captain Glenn was fighting His Highness, and it seemed that he had decided to take things seriously today. He had already lost 8 times in a row. Before the second-in-command could finish what would happen if he lost this time, the prince made a sweep and struck again. Captain Glenn found himself sitting on the ground, with His Majesty's sword towering above him, and he had to admit that he had lost. That's 9 defeats out of 9, our poor captain. We should buy him a drink to console him, Casey stated. However, he wondered where His Highness had learned such an unworthy combat technique as a trip. All this time, Leona silently watched the talkative knight. And although it is impossible not to notice that he has a well-hung tongue, what stands out most is his burning eyes, a look that only comes from someone who follows someone worthy. And what were her eyes like in her past life? Leona exhaled heavily, realizing that her past life had been wrong, and then called Miranda to work. She called her again, but there was silence again in response. The friend was in no hurry to respond, watching the training fight with huge eyes and an open mouth. "Your Highness," a female voice said, and Carmine turned around. Leona approached him and, asking permission to tidy up his outfit, began to straighten His Highness's shirt. At that moment, Miranda froze and, apologizing, said that she would bring clothes right away. Commander Glenn sat on the ground, sighing sadly that he had lost to His Majesty again. "Glenn, I've won, so the guard will be reduced to one person," the prince said, to the great indignation of the commander. He tried to object, but just one look from His Majesty put everything in its place, and the knight gave in, saying that he understood. While Leona was adjusting His Majesty's clothes, Bartz approached them with the message that the Emperor had started his reception earlier than usual today, and in order to visit him, they needed to go to the palace right now. The prince called the maid by name, and he said that he was instructing her to feed Nacha. The girl objected that Nacha only recognized her master and would not eat if she brought the food, to which His Majesty said that the horse liked her smell and would obey her. The young man had almost left, but he stopped next to Leona and leaned slightly towards the girl, which surprised her. "Try not to start another secret treasure hunt there. Come back right away," he said, lowering his voice. As he left, the prince smiled faintly, and Leona remained standing, experiencing mixed feelings. She hoped that he had forgotten about that incident in the garden, but this turned out to be completely wrong. The horse crunched the hay he had brought with gusto. Leona stood nearby and smiled at the fact that, as His Majesty had said, Nacha was indeed eating. "You say that Chamberlain Gerard was away for a while?" The girl heard someone whisper and looked away in surprise. There were people standing nearby, personal servants responsible for the food, and one of them was Heather, who had been a court maid before she and Miranda. Usually, preparing treats in the imperial family is the duty of the court maids, which means that Leona and Miranda should have done it, but since they were new, the chamberlain temporarily handed it over to the servants. The question remained, what were they whispering about with Heather now? Leona knew something was wrong. That same evening, the servants were doing their work in the Crown Prince's reception room. "We brought refreshments," said Heather, smiling as she carried a tray of tea. Bartz was very surprised why she was here outside of working hours. To which the girl replied that she was worried about the newcomers and couldn't just rest, so she came to help a little. Satisfied with her answer, the chamberlain's assistant ordered tea to be served, but Heather objected that serving tea was the duty of the personal maids. "That's right. Hurry up and bring the treat to His Majesty." She quickly handed the tray to Miranda, not giving her time to come to her senses. Wait, Leona was quicker and lifted the lid to peer into the teapot, which took Heather by surprise. But the girl had already managed to see what she expected, and then she turned her darkened gaze to her former personal servant. "Mr. Bartz, is it true that this should be served to a guest?" Leona pointed to the teapot, and Heather was seriously scared. "What are you saying, implying that I added it there?" Heather's voice trembled. The chamberlain's assistant looked into the teapot himself and was horrified by what he saw. The tea leaves looked paler than usual, and the aroma was completely different. There was milk added to the tea, he realized after a few moments. Although there are people who like to drink black tea with milk, the guest currently in the Western reception room has no connection with the Empire. He was a difficult customer because he hated it when anything was added to his tea that changed the color and aroma. The Empire's reception rooms are filled with all sorts of guests, and remembering their tastes and serving tea exactly according to their preferences is the main task of a personal maid, and the current situation is unforgivable. "I didn't know the guest was the chief financial officer," Heather blurted out defensively. But Leona replied that it was strange. No one had said that the current guest was a financial advisor, and Heather immediately realized her mistake. Bartz understood everything too, and no more words were needed. "Quiet! Where are you to shout like that?" he interrupted the maid, who was loudly trying to justify herself, and he added that he would make a decision separately, but for now she should return and wait. Heather was forced to leave and await her fate. Seeing that the chamberlain's assistant was puzzled, Leona suggested that they urgently needed something else and offered to prepare tea. He had no choice, the second Crown Prince's guest was waiting for tea right now. That's why Bartz agreed to the girl's proposal. "I brought tea," Leona said after a while. By this time, Lord Chamberlain Gerard had also returned. "I beg your pardon, that is why I prepared tea for His Majesty. Would that be acceptable?" Leona asked. When Gerard asked what kind of tea it was, the girl replied that it was iced tea with mint. The chief chamberlain had never heard of such a thing, but the maid assured him that it was often drunk in the hot western regions. There they prefer cold tea instead of hot, and since His Highness once visited the West, Leona decided to prepare this tea. Gerard couldn't hide the surprise on his face. Previously, when His Highness was served tea, he barely touched it and almost always left it. Gerard thought that he simply did not like tea. "Give it to me, I'll serve it myself." The man took the tray. And a few moments later, he was already entering the room with the message that the treat was served. The guest, by the way, was waiting. The prince looked with interest at the cups placed on the table, and he even took one of the cups intended for him and began to drink. Gerard watched His Majesty without stopping, experiencing a storm of feelings, but not giving them away. When the tea party was over, the servant came out of the office with a tray in the corridor. They were already waiting for him with the question whether His Majesty liked the tea. "Leona, I appoint you to the position of personal servant," the chief chamberlain said instead of answering. And the girl smiled reservedly, pleased that she had succeeded. Leona gratefully replied that she would serve His Highness faithfully. The cups, like the teapot, shone with emptiness because every drop had been drunk. The Crown Prince's reception room began to resemble a heavenly palace until now. The Emperor had only allowed the Crown Prince a strictly limited time, and everyone in the Crown Prince's palace only worked at certain hours. But now everything had changed, and the servants worked almost to the point of exhaustion. Since there are frequent battles in the Empire, it was enough to prepare wine and herbs, Miranda noted wearily, making the bed with the last of her strength. But when she looked at her friend, she noticed something unusual. Leona had a plate with some unusual treat in her hands, and the girl assumed that it was a sweet, to which she replied that it was a date from a date palm. They grow in the West and are difficult to get in the Empire, but Leona found dried fruits at a retail sale in the capital. At that moment, the Crown Prince himself returned to the room. He had just taken a bath, so he was wearing only a robe, and he was wiping his wet hair with a towel. The robe barely covered his muscular chest, down which droplets of water were running. Not at all embarrassed by the girls, His Highness sat down on a chair and continued to dry his hair. "I have prepared wine and snacks. Please allow me to take my leave, Your Highness. Tomorrow is an important day, so I have chosen light snacks. Enjoy them without unnecessary heaviness, and have a good rest." Leona bowed respectfully. "And you prepared this treat too?" Carmine looked around the table carefully, and his gaze lingered on one plate. The girl confirmed, adding that these fruits are good for health and they are suitable as a snack for wine. The young man smiled faintly. She guessed his tastes surprisingly accurately. "Wait, Leona, stay," the prince ordered when the girl was about to leave. Miranda left, and His Majesty remained silent for so long that the girl herself asked if he had any more instructions for her. But Carmine ignored her question and only told her to come closer. "Come closer, come to me." His voice did not betray any emotion. Leona complied and, approaching the prince, bowed her head. Carmine, in a softer voice, told the girl to raise her head. Now, while everything is calm, he wants her to be comfortable here. These words surprised the girl. "Since you came, living in the palace has become much easier. Before I would return to the palace where I didn't know a single person, and I was lonely every day, but you have become a great comfort to me." The man opened up and suggested that she tell him if there was anything she wanted. The girl replied that it was a great honor for her, but he had already fulfilled her wish. "You mean that your desire is to be near me?" The prince seemed to sincerely not believe it. But Leona said just as sincerely that she was doing it only to be near His Highness, and that she didn't need anything else. He just looked at the girl and thought about something. "I understand. I understood your feelings. You can go," the prince finally said, and the girl wished His Majesty a peaceful rest. When the maid left, the young man was left alone with his thoughts. Her hand reached for the dates, and out loud she said, "Does she really not need anything?" Such words make you respect her even more. "What do you think?" asked Carmine, looking away. In response to his words, a fair-haired young man named Jahangun appeared in the room. "It doesn't look like she's lying," he replied. Carmine himself thought so too, but that is precisely why he has suspicions. At her age and with such experience, how could she be so calm? And how did she know about his preferences to prepare everything so well? Everything was too perfect. "Don't worry too much. The results of the investigation into her will be out soon," the guest reassured. "Speaking of the investigation, it looks like His Highness has also ordered it," Carmine suggested with a sigh. "But right now there is little reason to count on this." Meanwhile, Leona closed the door behind her when a worried voice called her name. The girl saw Miranda hurrying towards her and was very surprised that she was waiting for her. The friend was sincerely worried about her and was worried that His Highness might ask something. The other servants also listened attentively to this whole small conversation between the girls. This did not escape Leona's attention, and she understood what they were thinking. Then she said, a little louder than necessary, that His Highness had praised her for a job well done and enjoyed the reaction of those around her. In fact, Leona suspected that the prince might begin to suspect her. To make it easier for him to get used to the palace, she used the experience gained in the war, because the main thing was that he felt calm. It was a kind of debt from a past life. But here are his words: if you have a desire, tell me, I will fulfill it. She didn't expect him to try to test her like that. In the Hamel Empire, the Rage dynasty had few heirs. The emperors had many concubines in an attempt to continue their line. But the divine spirit of the empire did not bless, and they received only one son. Ever since the Guardian's scent disappeared completely 100 years ago, for some reason the number of descendants has increased slightly, but even then they were very few. I greet the Emperor. The second prince bowed before his father's throne. I, Carmine Rudel, who inherited the power of the royal king, swear to eradicate the heretics who threaten the empire and dedicate myself to completing the unification of the continent without sparing myself, the young man said. He delivered his entire speech in a bowed position and did not dare to raise his eyes. The current emperor also had dozens of concubines in addition to the empress, but there were only 2 children, the late crown prince from the empress and the current one from a concubine. However, when the first prince suddenly died, the only heir left to the throne was Carmine. Carmine Rudel, the emperor's voice was thunderous. On that day, he announced to everyone that Carmine was proclaimed crown prince and would inherit the throne. All the servants loudly swore allegiance to the future emperor. Leona also swore, mentally adding that until His Highness ascended the throne, she would give everything to be his protection. Leona, someone called her name, and the girl turned around. The crown prince was hurrying to the servants, and Leona congratulated him on his accession to the throne, but Carmine was only interested in whether his horse had been prepared, since he had asked them to hurry with this in the morning. Leona apologized that she should have taken care of it before he told her, leaving out the fact that she and Natcha had a nice chat while she was feeding him. In addition, the girl added that now she will personally brew tea every day. If everything is reasonable, I may not interfere, which means I am entrusting it to you, the crown prince agreed. They had barely finished their conversation when a third man intervened, calling for His Majesty. It was Sonia and her minions, smiling broadly and asking if he would like to rest a little and use the carriage for the next meeting. The women did not calm down and tried in every way to respect His Majesty, and Leona understood why. But she also noticed that the crown prince looked tired. He did not like congratulation ceremonies, so he limited communication with the maids to a minimum. However, one can understand the other maids. Because of her and Miranda, they were unable to atone for past mistakes, and now they have such an opportunity. Maybe that's why there was so much wariness in his gaze today. He, who usually can't stand displays of goodwill, was now looking at you with such warmth. Leona was used to seeing him only as strict and rude, but it turns out he has that side too. That's it. I'm going to rest until the next meeting. Everyone leave. His Majesty couldn't stand it, and loudly added not to disturb him until he leaves himself. And with these words, he quickly disappeared behind the bedroom door, leaving the servants to look at each other in bewilderment. Sonia stopped Leona, who was about to leave. There are not enough hands here today. You are not needed here. But since you are so capable, we should not leave you idle. Do the laundry, ordered the senior maid. Leona was indignant. Why would she be washing bed linen in the maid's dormitory? On such a festive day, we too must be clean and tidy. Wash all the bed linen of all the maids. Sonia grinned. Tomorrow I will have to serve His Majesty again. So today the whole day is laundry. The other maids are busy, so Leona will do everything alone. The woman said so firmly that Miranda and Bartz were shocked. This is too much for Leona alone. Please let me help. Miranda stood up for her friend, but Sonia was adamant that she could handle it alone, because she was capable enough to deserve His Majesty's trust. That's right, Leona, the senior maid asked sarcastically. Leona understood everything, so she didn't argue and said that she would do everything. She silently left, accompanied by puzzled looks, and she headed straight to one of the rooms of the maid's house. There she looked around, wondering what to choose. The girl's gaze fell on a jar of ink standing on the nightstand. She carefully picked up the jar from the table and then swung it hard, spilling ink onto the bed next to her. Since she was sent to wash clothes, it meant she needed to put something in the bed. Sometime later, in the courtyard of the maids in the Emperor's palace, Leona walked across the yard with a bundle of dirty laundry. Stopping, the girl thought that in about 10 minutes the person she needed would pass here, so she would just hide for a while. At that moment, a pair of maids passed by her. The girls complained to each other that they were very tired, but were glad that at least the coronation ceremony was shortened, and even the festival was ordered to be cancelled. But to remove the parade is too much. His Majesty is probably still worried because he loved the Crown Prince so much, the maids lamented. They also did not fail to discuss the new Crown Prince, who is not at all like His Majesty, which is why strange rumors are circulating. Then, lowering her voice, one of the girls retold these rumors, to which the second one was genuinely loudly surprised. But her friend immediately asked her to be quieter because these were just rumors and imagination. It was none of their business, and it was time for them to get to work. Leona, who was standing in the bushes nearby, heard their conversation, but she didn't hear everything they were whispering, but she guessed what they were talking about. Doubting the Crown Prince's origins was one of the weapons the Empress used in her past life. The current Crown Prince was superior to the deceased in everything, both in character and in merit, but the Emperor supported the former until his death, all because the current Crown Prince was in no way similar to the Emperor, and at the time of his birth, strange rumors were circulating in the palace. The concubine who gave birth to the prince had intercourse with her half-brother. The Emperor, mistaking the letters between brother and sister for secret correspondence, began to secretly spy on them. Later, the concubine's innocence was proven, but the Emperor was never able to completely rid himself of his doubts. He ended up sending her brother to war against the barbarians, where he died. This happened when the current Crown Prince was 4 years old. 3 years later, the concubine, under the pretext that the prince needed treatment for an unknown illness, sent him out of the palace and committed suicide inside the palace. In her past life, Leona had carefully investigated all of this. The rumors had turned out to be false, the concubine was innocent, and the Crown Prince was certainly the rightful heir. But the truth didn't matter. What was important was that doubts had settled in the Emperor's heart. The Empress knew how to control people with her beautiful speech and sweet voice. She deftly penetrated into the very depths of the Emperor's heart, who found himself completely at the mercy of her intrigues, and the Crown Prince had to leave the palace. It would be better if Leona found the Empress herself and immediately pulled out the root. Before arriving at the palace, nothing is known about Viota. It is unknown whether she was a commoner. It is unknown under what circumstances she met the Emperor and ended up at the palace, and whether her name is really Viota. Even Leona, her closest confidant, doesn't know anything, so she'll have to act partially, doing what's possible, but first she needs to remove the irritants. The bell rang. It seemed the time had come for the one she had been waiting for to move out. The Crown Prince emerged from his chambers, accompanied by a row of servants. "Isn't it too much to make a new maid wash all the bed linen by herself?" Gerard asked Sonia in a whisper, to which the woman replied that it was beyond his authority. When the chamberlain asked what if His Highness called Leona, the senior maid replied that there were enough others who could replace her. Interrupting their conversation, a maid came up with the message that the head maid was calling for Mrs. Sonia. Sonia immediately responded to the call of her immediate superior, Mrs. Odell. But she immediately became wary when she saw that they were not alone in the room. Leona, that girl, was also there, and what's more, she was smiling amiably at Mrs. Odell. "Do you know why you were called?" Sonia asked the head maid as Leona walked slowly past. Moreover, the girl smiled when she heard the question whether this sheet was Sonia's property. Chief Senior Maid Odell is a person of strict principles. Even the Emperor deeply trusts her. She is very strict in matters of law and order, and even in a high position does not use her position for gain. That's why Leona decided to use Ms. Odell when she encountered her in the courtyard. "What are you doing? You crashed into the main senior maid of the Imperial Palace. You didn't even apologize, didn't bow. You've completely lost your fear." The maid accompanying Lady Odell was indignant. The girl who pushed him trembled in fear and began to apologize. "Excuse me, I am a servant from the palace, Leona. Greetings to the head maid." The girl was trembling. Tears appeared in her eyes. Odell, who had already managed to rise from her fall, recognized the girl. She was the same new girl who had become His Majesty's personal servant. But then she became interested in the question of why the personal maid was not with His Highness on such a day. The women listened with great surprise as the girl told them that she was on her way to wash the bed linen on the orders of Madame Sonia. Leona feigned fear very well, but at the same time, she thought that Sonia really didn't like the fact that the new girl was in the Crown Prince's good graces, of course, but nothing could be done about it. But there are also laundries in the Crown Prince's palace. Why go to the Emperor's palace? The lady was surprised. Leona had an excuse for this incident. She accidentally spilled ink while putting away the bed linen that Mrs. Sonia takes care of. and she doesn't know how to wash off such stains, and Madame Sonia forbade her to seek help from the maids of the Crown Prince's palace, so she decided to at least ask for help from the maids from the Imperial Palace. In addition, she was very scared, since Madame Sonia's bed linen is special, and she is afraid that she will not be able to cope with it, which greatly interested Odell. "Look, this is the first time I've seen such luxurious fabric." Leona showed them the sheet, and the women immediately determined that the bed linen was made of the finest Girana material. After exchanging glances with her colleague, the woman immediately ordered that Sonia be called. "In our maid service, you can only use what is officially issued by the palace. Use other people's things without permission. Did you really think that you, as a senior maid, are allowed to break the rules?" Mistress Odell scolded Sonia while Leona left the room. Considering that her work was done, the girl calmly walked about her business, listening to the cries of the head servant, promising to check what else Sonia had brought to the palace. That day, Sonia, the chief servant of the Crown Prince's palace, received a severe punishment, and rumors that she had been temporarily suspended from her post spread throughout the palace, while Leona continued to serve His Majesty as usual and completed the appointment ceremony. When the moon was shining brightly in the sky, it was finally time for rest. The friends lay in their beds, enjoying a well-deserved rest. But Leona had no intention of sleeping at all, and after waiting until Miranda fell asleep, she got out of bed. Temporary suspension is not the end. To drive Sonia out of the palace, you will need the help of one person. And it was to this person that the girl was heading at such a late hour. Knocking on the door, she said that she had an urgent matter that she needed to talk about and asked him to give her a little time. "Why are you here?" Sonia's assistant appeared on the threshold. Hiding her hands, she said that I was feeling a little uncomfortable right now and asked to postpone the conversation until tomorrow. Leona, having apologized in advance, grabbed Ellie by the hand, rolling up the sleeve of her clothes, causing the girl to scream. Her arms from wrist to elbow were shining with fresh red scars. Ellie was scared. "Don't tell anyone, please," she fell helplessly in front of Leona. The girl's shoulders shook with crying. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she froze when she heard the words of the new maid. "Miss Ellie, I will help you," Leona said calmly, leaning towards her. A month has passed since the ceremony. After Sonia's dismissal, chaos reigned in the palace, however. Quite soon everyone returned to their duties. The loss of his first son had devastated the emperor, and after the ceremony he continued to neglect state affairs, leaving the crown prince to shoulder the burden. "That's enough for today. The meeting has already dragged on. Everyone is free," said the tired crown prince. The tortured gentleman left the room, all but one. "And why did you stay, Chancellor? Do you want to discuss something alone?" asked the prince. And the man said that he had one proposal for the prince. Leona immediately understood what it was about. She said that they would clear the table and leave, so she asked to speak calmly. The chancellor mentioned that the tea was excellent, and he knew that the prince's maids were skilled craftsmen, but they even had refined tastes, as expected of servants at the palace. As soon as they left, Miranda volunteered to wash the cups, and other servants approached Leona. "Mrs. Leona, this is the first time the chancellor has praised our tea," they said enthusiastically. They admired how amazing Madame Leona was, but the girl herself did not share the enthusiasm. She knew that the chancellor would like anything if you added enough sugar. "You teach us a lot, madam. You even prepared different tea for each minister." The servants all admired, and Leona modestly replied that she also makes mistakes, asking to guide her in the future. The girl understood that everyone behaved this way after Sonia left. The chamberlain returned to his duties, and the position of head maid was given to Ellie. Bartz now helps Ellie, since some of the elders were removed. Thanks to this, their position in the palace improved. The senior maids, who had previously only delegated duties, began to work. Even the servants, who did not allow him to work in peace, now report to Leona. But she doesn't want to get closer, so they try to somehow establish contact. She had willingly used such guys before, convincing them by force if necessary or pressuring them to victory. But those who are easily influenced by power will become a threat once Viota comes to the palace. But getting rid of them will not work either. It will cause discontent, so she does nothing now. "The guest is leaving. I must go," said Leona, noticing that the chamberlain had left the room. She hurried to clean up as quickly as possible so as not to disturb the prince, and at the same time asked the servants to see the guests out. "I'll clean up," Leona said, entering the room. But the answer was silence, and the girl looked up in surprise. His Majesty was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. The girl assumed that he had simply fallen asleep. Thinking about covering him up, she remembered hearing somewhere that the prince was naturally always hot, so perhaps she should take off his shoes. Leona did so, but something caught her attention. As soon as she pulled off the first shoe, she discovered that His Majesty was barefoot. Barely holding back her laughter, the girl wondered if he really didn't wear socks. He was probably uncomfortable in formal clothes. The prince didn't like uniforms that restricted his movements. She reached out to his tie, intending to loosen it so that the prince would be more comfortable. But I didn't have time to do this because her hand was intercepted and the young man himself suddenly woke up. "I'm sorry to bother you. I thought you might be uncomfortable and decided to loosen my tie," the girl explained. The prince held her hand for a few moments, which was quite uncomfortable. And then with a sharp movement he let go of the girl's hand. He still didn't say a word, and Leona decided that since he was silent, everything was fine. She would quickly finish the work and leave. Carmine watched the girl until she reported that everything was done. Bowing, she added that it was now time for her to go, and that His Highness had time until the next meeting. The girl did not finish speaking, as her gaze caught sight of something interesting, namely, the bare legs of His Highness, or she could not hold back a smile. "You can relax, even if only for a little while. Take a rest." She finished the sentence with a wide smile. Carmine's heart skipped a beat and his eyes widened in surprise. The young man wondered if she was really so amused by his bare legs. Time in the palace flowed as usual. "This is my friend Jahan Gun," His Majesty informed all the servants present. The chief chamberlain and the chief maid respectfully greeted the guest and said that they would do everything possible to make his stay comfortable. Carmine looked at them with distrust. The chamberlain spoke smoothly. This was the personal guest of the crown prince, therefore he deserved respect. However, Jahan Gun is a foreigner, and for a long time the borders of the empire were closed. That's why strangers are not welcome here. It's surprising that someone from the imperial family invited a foreigner. Carmine was worried that the servants would be rude to him, but they behaved with dignity. However, the young man looked to the side and realized that, of course, not everyone behaved with dignity. Some were whispering quietly. His Highness walked past these servants on purpose to be noticed. They, of course, noticed and immediately bowed. "I greet the prince and his guest." Carmine suddenly heard a soft female voice. It was Leona who said that she would do everything to serve His Highness and his good friend. At Carmine's request, Jahan Gun found out everything about this girl, but of course, a couple of sheets of paper were not enough to understand what kind of person she was. Taking a look at the offending servants, Carmine regretfully stated that it was always like this. Some looked down on people because of their status, while others obeyed out of fear. But Leona was different from everyone else. "Your Highness, are there any orders?" the girl asked. "The way she said she wanted to serve him keeps popping into my head. She behaves obediently, but does not bend under someone else's authority. She serves, but does not revere. She is respectful. She questions everything and everyone. But you do not want to push her away." Smiling at his thoughts, Carmine thought, "Why is this so? Today, wash Nacha. I will feed him personally." He gave the order to Leona, thereby ignoring the disrespectful attitude of the other servants. Watching the girl leave, the young man thought that time would show what kind of person she was. At that moment, his friend also headed in the other direction out of the room. Long blonde hair fluttered as he walked, and for some reason the dear guest did not pay attention to the owner of the palace. But the chamberlain and the chief servant became worried, because Lord Jahan Gun needed an escort so as not to get lost in the palace. The crown prince stopped them, saying that he himself would return by evening. "Frankly, he is too fast for you, and he will not talk to anyone except me," he explained in response to the servants' objections. "So it's better for them to focus on their duties and go to meet with the minister." "It's nice, Nacha. I'm going to bathe you today," Leona said, wetting the horse's back. Then she took out 2 bars of soap and asked him to choose which one he liked best. At first, Nacha was surprised, but then he leaned towards the girl's right hand, choosing soap. "Nacha, you're smarter than many people," Leona admired, to which the horse snorted approvingly. The animal turned, looked into the distance and seemed to smile, which did not escape the girl's attention. Leona herself looked in the same direction. Noticing that she and Nacha were not alone here, the prince's guest was standing nearby among the trees. The young man did not utter a word, and he only gave the girl a fleeting glance. Then Nacha handed him something red, as if treating him. The horse gratefully accepted the treat and began eating it fairly quickly. The fruit, red on the outside, was filled with red seeds as well. Leona had never seen this fruit in the empire, but it looked vaguely familiar. This is a pomegranate, the girl asked Jahan. She remembered that in her past life, the crown prince had once brought a lot of this stuff. The fruit of the western lands of the continent. At the time it seemed strange to her, because the prince does not like pomegranates, but apparently Nacha likes them. "Ah, you're leaving already, goodbye." Leona said goodbye as Jahan quickly walked away. But the young man never said a word, and walked away without turning around while she spoke. Leona followed him with her gaze, this mysterious guest. He was the same as in his past life. I remember that while she was looking for the prince's weaknesses, she came across Jahangun, but she couldn't find out anything about him. All attempts at surveillance failed, and there was no information about his past either. There are 5 different races on the continent. Not counting them, most of these groups live in the west. All representatives have distinctive features. The Katago tribe from the land of grasses in the northwest. The representatives of the race are tall, dark-skinned, and red-haired. They also have small horns. In the desert lands is the Lumen. People there are characterized by brown skin, gray eyes and hair, and pointed ears, while the southern Lumen have white lips. In the jungle in the south live 2 tribes, the Sayobi with green skin, white hair and dark green eyes, and next to them the Saya with white skin, black hair and eyes, with green markings running across their bodies. But Jahangun looks very much like an imperialist. At first glance you can't tell who he is. The only thing that stands out is the wooden earring in his right ear. Leona even studied the small tribes just in case, but it was all in vain. What is curious is that after the prince lost power, Jahangun disappeared without a trace. And then the prince himself disappeared. She looked for both of them to protect the little heir, but nothing came of it. If she fails in this life too, the heir will again be in danger. I need to prepare for any outcome. This time I will find out everything about Jahangun, Leona decided. In her past life, she couldn't figure out what tribe he was from, but she found out one interesting fact. Perhaps it will help to find out more, but it will take some work. A stack of papers plopped down on top of similar documents on the table. Damn, these talentless aristocrats are driving me crazy. The emperor doesn't want to work, and the council is nothing but trouble. What should I do? Carmine was indignant. He wondered how much longer he had to follow their rules. You already know the answer, Jahangun said calmly. And the prince really knew, but he just didn't want to accept it. He sighed wearily and pulled the rope, summoning a servant. He immediately appeared, and the prince ordered wine to be brought. Then Carmine sank wearily into a chair, waiting for drinks. The young man's gaze fell on his white-haired friend. Oh, it slipped my mind, you need another drink, the prince realized, but it was too late, and Jahan said that he would not drink. Carmine decided that it seemed that it would not work to govern the country through the council. The old man would not give up power either, pretending to give up his place, but continuing to put pressure on him, and the advisors were constantly doubting, dragging out each meeting. Jahan asked what His Majesty would do. The prince did not answer immediately, but still decided that he needed to come to an agreement with the chancellor. Are you serious about accepting his offer? The guest asked, and Carmine replied that they didn't have time and would have to do it. In fact, Jahangun strongly doubted that this would be a good decision, but he did not have time to voice his thoughts. Your Highness, I have brought wine, Leona said, entering the room with a drinks cart. Jahan watched in amazement as the maid poured what was not red wine into the glass. Having finished her work, Leona wanted to take her leave, but His Majesty asked why she had brought 2 kinds of wine. And with a stony face, he listened to the girl's answer that she was not sure what the guest would want, but if the wine was not suitable, she would immediately bring another one. The prince then remarked that it was already late and why she was still up, to which the maid replied that she was waiting for His Highness to go to bed. You must be exhausted from now on after dinner. Swap with someone, the crown prince ordered. But when the maid objected that she was fine, Carmine sternly repeated that it was an order and she had to agree. Maybe you should have a drink after all, the prince asked his friend after the girl had left. Jahan had no more reason to refuse and reached for his glass. And how did she guess, the prince said thoughtfully, looking at his glass. How Leon's maid figured out that Jahangun doesn't drink red wine. It's probably a coincidence, but the fact that she's never wrong is frightening. A strange woman, Carmine drawled, and the guest thoughtfully agreed with him. And then suddenly he said with concern that he couldn't feel her aura. An aura is a unique energy that surrounds everyone. All living things have it, but he doesn't feel Leona's aura. In rare cases, like Carmine, when the aura is too strong, it is difficult to sense, but in her case, it is as if she is already dead. She even caused trouble for you, an amazing person. She sometimes scares me more than the emperor. It's no wonder that she doesn't even have an aura, said the prince. Jahan tried to object that it was serious, but the prince suggested that they focus on their business, and he proposed to drink to their goal, to which the guest was forced to agree. Life and work in the Crown Prince's palace went on as usual. "Leona, what are you going to do?" Miranda asked, interrupting her friend's thoughts. The girl happily reminded him that His Majesty was leaving soon. The prince is leaving with a small detachment, which means that the personal servants are having a day off. Several days had already passed since Jahan Gun's arrival. For some time, Leona followed him around to understand his preferences, but, like last time, she failed to win his trust. However, he looked at her as if he wanted to say something, which means he remembered. Time flies quickly. The first holiday since the day the prince was recognized as the heir is approaching. All the servants and workers will be resting. So Miranda asked what Leona's plans were for this day. The girl herself said with a laugh that she was going to sleep all day, so there was no need to even look for her. They haven't had a proper break yet, so Miranda asks, and this makes Leona think. And to her friend's surprise, she decided to leave the palace for a while, because she would soon need something. Without really saying anything to her friend, Leona hurried to get permission to leave the palace. Soon the girl was already leaving the senior maid's reception room. Looking at the documents in her hands, she thought that everything turned out to be much faster than she thought. At that moment, something caught her attention. Mrs. Ellie was passing by and Leona called out to her. "Where are you heading?" the girl asked, adding that she had just received permission to leave. But Ellie didn't want to or couldn't speak, and as she ran, she apologized, saying that she was a little busy right now. Leona sighed heavily. It seemed she had come too early. Soon came that very holiday weekend, which the city's residents celebrated with particular pomp. "Let's celebrate a successful trade deal with the Northwest." The clink of beer mugs was heard. The men were glad that the work where they worked like crazy was over, and now on such a beautiful day they could enjoy the peace. And everything was fine until their peace was interrupted by an insistent female voice. "Excuse me, I accidentally heard that you were in the Northwestern lands, right?" the girl asked, folding her hands in prayer. And when the men confirmed and asked who she was, the girl took off her hood and introduced herself as Leona and told why she had come. "I came to you because my older brother was called up for the Northwestern War. They are sending him straight to the border. Imagine how worried I am. I would like to get my dear brother ready for the journey, but I know nothing about those lands, so I ask you for advice." Leona turned on all her acting skills. The workers were impressed by her speech and were happy to give advice. Leona immediately began to write everything down. They mainly talked about the weather, diseases, and other related problems of the Northwestern lands. Having said goodbye to the talkative peasants, the girl changed her clothes so as not to be caught. She was glad that there was still time left for shopping, which now needed to be hidden in the nearest hotel, and on the way back to buy a gift for Miranda. As she passed a shop window, she stopped. There, on a soft pillow, lay a multicolored baby rattle. "The little heir never had a chance to play with her," she said quietly to herself. Leona stood in front of this display case for a long time, lost in her own sad thoughts. So long that the owner of the store came out and asked if she was looking for something specific. "Oh no, I was just walking and thought that the toys were beautiful. I have to go." The girl got scared and began to back away, not noticing the person standing behind her. Leona gasped and apologized, but the man asked if she was Leon's maid, which surprised her greatly. Because standing in front of her was perfumer Phil Mago, no less surprised. "I'm so embarrassed that I bumped into you. We haven't seen each other for a long time," the girl said in a friendly manner. And she was very surprised when the perfumer said that he wanted to meet her before he left. So he was lucky. "I'm going in search of new raw materials," the man said with a smile. Leona realized that she hadn't even properly thanked him, and he was already leaving because she wanted to give him something, since those dried leaves had helped her a lot. "Maybe you'll at least take this." Rummaging through her bags, she found a bag of cherry candies. Phil was a little confused and asked how she knew that he liked them, to which the girl replied that it was just a coincidence, and she liked them too. The perfumer noticed that they had a lot in common and Leona smiled, but in fact she took these candies especially for him. In his past life, when he received the title of King of Perfume, the Emperor tried to reward him with gold and jewels, but Phil only asked for a bag of cherry candies. This story became so famous that songs were composed about it, praising Mago's kindness. Leona asked where he was heading, but the man himself didn't know. For now, he was simply heading south. "I hope we meet again soon, Leona," said the perfumer when the girl wished him an easy journey. His words sounded so strange that Leona stopped, watching him go. Then, looking at the darkening sky, she thought that it was time for her to go too. The sun was setting when Leona returned to the palace. "Miranda, I'm back," the girl announced, crossing the threshold of the room and immediately heard a loud crack. And then she saw the source of the sound, which surprised her beyond words. Mrs. Heather was standing in the middle of the room with a very frightened look, and right in front of her on the floor lay a tray and shards of dishes. You came back a bit late. Miranda said that you went shopping like a walk," the uninvited guest asked with a nervous smile. But Leona did not answer her questions, but asked herself what she was doing in their room and where Miranda was. Heather replied that she just wanted to get to know them better since it was their day off, and brought tea and snacks. But she wasn't there, and Miranda had developed a stomach ache while they were chatting, and unfortunately dropped the tray, so she would clean up and leave now. Leona watched with suspicion as she nervously collected the broken pieces of crockery. Something's wrong. There are only 2 cups. If she wanted to sit with her and Miranda, where's the other cup? Leona called out to Mrs. Heather, causing her to flinch. "You said you wanted to talk to me. It's mutual," the girl smiled. And since she was here, she might stay a while, and Leona offered to clean up and make them some tea. The woman hesitated. Her eyes darted around in search of an excuse, and finally she said that she didn't want to refuse, but it was too late, so she suggested they chat another time. As Leona thought, Heather had deliberately chosen the moment when she would be away. She was clearly up to something. Standing in the middle of the room, Leona thought hard. Soon Miranda returned, clutching her stomach, and asked if Mrs. Heather had left yet. "Yes, but why are you so pale? You're not feeling well," the girl worried, seeing her friend's condition, to which she explained that her stomach had suddenly started to hurt and she had gone to the restroom. And when Leona asked what she had eaten, Miranda replied that she had only drunk tea with Mrs. Heather. But she was fine, so it was unlikely that it was the tea. She probably just felt unwell, the girl decided, but Leona's face darkened. She said that Miranda needed to rest and go to bed early. Leona took care of her friend and helped her to bed. After making sure that Miranda was asleep, the girl began her examination. First of all, she opened all the cabinets, and she carefully examined their contents, looking for the slightest discrepancy. Here, or maybe here. The girl literally looked through every centimeter of the room. Heather definitely hid something here, and Leona was sure of it. Suddenly, something caught the girl's attention, and she realized that this was what she was looking for. Something was sparkling faintly on the transparent glass of the window. It was a drawing made with a translucent liquid, but the sun's rays made it barely visible. It is definitely the writing of the Katago tribe. It is written Khan, which means leader or chief. For a long time, the empire and the nomadic tribes lived on opposite sides of the border, sometimes trading, sometimes fighting. But everything changed when the current emperor ascended the throne. His youthful ardor led to the fact that he wanted to subjugate the nomads and unleashed a war. For 10 years, the empire fought with the tribes, but it was not possible to expand the borders or subjugate the tribes. The defeated emperor hated the nomads with all his soul, and when his dear concubine showed interest in a foreign culture and language, he cut off her limbs and finished her off. He also ordered that all books written in the language of the nomads be burned. But now the emperor is old and weak, so Nacha and Jahan can stay in the palace. Although the writing of the nomads is still banned, if anyone says that they are studying it, exile will be the most merciful punishment. It's a pitiful sight to see them resort to such tricks to get rid of interference. Although Leona used the exact same method to deal with Vyota's enemy, I wonder if the maid knows that this method has its drawbacks. Later that night, events developed rapidly. Several special maids moved silently in a neat row along the corridors. Palace Order Department. Maid Leona. Maid Miranda, get up, a sharp voice rang out, and the door of the room swung open with a bang. The girls sat up on their beds in surprise and were ordered to leave the room. "What are you sitting down for? Get on your knees quickly," the same voice ordered, and other maids began to come out of their rooms into the corridor. Leona sat quietly on her knees while Miranda shook with horror and confusion. "What happened? Why are they checking us?" The girl could barely hold back her tears. Leona asked her friend not to worry, promising that everything would be fine. "We didn't do anything, I'm right," the girl asked, taking Miranda's hand. "They did nothing. And you believe it, however, it is likely that only one of you is to blame. Such things are usually done alone," the guard noted. The look of this warlike girl did not bode well. She announced that an inscription in the language of the nomads had been found in the maid's room, which caused a frightened murmur among the other maids. The use of this script is prohibited by imperial laws. Who of them is responsible? If they confess, only one will be punished. Leona tightened her grip on Miranda's shaking hand. But none of the girls said a word. I understand, then you both will go, the guard stated, but she was interrupted. She looked at Leona in surprise, who asked where exactly they found the inscription. It's written on the window with a special translucent substance. Do you want to add anything? She asked Leona. The girl wanted, moreover, she had an objection to this accusation and asked if Leon could prove that the inscription was made by them, hinting that someone had entered their room. But there is evidence. How can you confirm that it was someone else? The guard got angry. But Leona calmly asked another question: had they found the bottle with the special substance that was used to make the inscription in her and Miranda's room? No, came the answer, and all the maids gasped. We didn't even know about the inscription on the window. You said yourself that it was made with something translucent, Leona continued calmly, adding that they quickly found it, which means someone told them about it, and this person looks more like a subordinate of the nomads. Nonsense, subordinate of the nomads, Heather suddenly said loudly and indignantly, then covered her mouth in horror. As Leona had expected, it was Mrs. Heather who snitched. Mistress, something strange happened recently. The maid Heather never liked us, but today she visited our room. Leona rose from her knees and addressed the head guard. When Heather objected that she wanted to get along with them, Leona retorted that she was not there at the time, and Miranda went to the restroom because her stomach hurt from Mrs. Heather's tea, which meant that she was alone in their room for a long time. Heather continued to shout that it was slander and she just wanted to be friends, but she noticed Nomad writing on the window, to which the girl asked how she knew it was them. Well, it's obvious, Heather said, and then bit her tongue, realizing that she had given herself away. Looking at the dumbfounded maid, Leona noted that she herself was not familiar with the writing of the tribes, but she had heard that they used figures and unusual patterns that were difficult to recognize. The Imperials would simply take them for scribbles. Mrs. Heather, where did you learn the language of the tribes? Leon asked the woman directly. And although the woman continued to deny her involvement, Leona looked at the guard, and she understood everything. Check out Heather's room, she ordered her subordinates. That's the price for a stupid way to get rid of enemies, Heather, Leona thought, looking at the woman. For this method to work, two conditions must be met. Firstly, all the evidence must be prepared in advance. Secondly, it must be ensured that the first person to find the writings is someone who knows them. In her past life, Leona hid ink in the victim's room and then bribed the maid, whose father was a translator, to become the first witness, which makes it impossible to prove innocence in such a situation. But Heather wasn't really prepared. She didn't even consider that she herself could get hurt, and naturally, the law enforcement department quickly found the ink that the inscription was made with, as well as torn pieces of fabric in the trash with the same inscription. Take the maid Heather to the order room, the head of the guards ordered without delay. Heather, although horrified, still resisted, screaming that it was not her and that she knew nothing about the inscription. It was Sonia, she ordered me. I simply obeyed, the maid cried out desperately, pointing her finger at the senior servant. The incessant arguing between Sonia and Heather went on for some time, and the guards, seeing all this, thought that they were not being paid enough. We will conduct a proper investigation, the security guards promised, taking the resisting Sonia into custody. What does this mean? Free me! It's all a setup! Leona is to blame! The woman screeched in such a way that it only caused discontent among those around her. As the suspects were led away, Leone and Miranda were informed that they were on probation until the case was resolved. Then the guard shouted for all the maids to go to their rooms. Leona helped Miranda get up and return to their room. Following her friend, Leona saw something and ran to the side. Having stopped in front of the person she needed, the girl called him by name. It was Mrs. Ellie, frightened by everything that was happening. You may be afraid and want to run away, but if you are even a little willing to change, this is your chance, Leona said firmly. The assistant head maid only slowed her pace for a moment, but she didn't respond, as if she had ignored Leona's words. Meanwhile, something was also happening in the capital of the empire. Carmine looked around the city thoughtfully, perplexed that this was the capital of the empire. Let's go back to the palace, he suggested to Nacha. But the horse had his own plans and was not going to leave, and he persistently grabbed the owner by the clothes and pulled him to the side. Nacha led the crown prince to a jewelry shop that only had women's items. You want a bandage? You're not going to wear it yourself, the man asked stupidly, causing the horse to shake its head in resentment. Then Carmine wondered why he wanted such a thing in the first place, and suddenly it dawned on him. "Is this really for Leona?" the prince asked in surprise, and from the horse's contented look it was clear that this was the case. And then he looked at his friend suspiciously. "Nacha, you didn't mistake this woman for a horse, did you?" asked Carmine, and from the horse's look he realized that he had said something stupid. When the necessary purchases were made, the prince headed home, but stopped in surprise. After all, Nacha was so happy that he even skipped along. It was unusual for Carmine to see that he liked someone. At the main gate of the palace, everything was calm. "Your Highness, you have arrived. Why did you suddenly disappear? Can you even imagine how everyone was alarmed when they didn't find you in the morning?" Casey, nervous, literally pounced on the prince. Carmine let out a tired breath and noticed that he had left a note. Hadn't they found it? "They found it. That's why I waited here. Maybe it seems to you that we're nothing but trouble, but why run away?" the knight said resentfully. Casey explained to His Majesty in a hurried and verbose manner the horror they had experienced when he and Lord Jahan had disappeared in the morning, but the prince waved his hand, telling them to forget about it, and asked where everyone was. "They are looking for you. We are your guard. We couldn't just sit there," Casey retorted. He also asked in surprise where Mr. Jahan was, to which Carmine replied that his guest would return soon. He had his own business. Casey's face literally showed how his respect for his guest was diminishing. Now Jahan was a stranger who first ignored them, and now abandoned His Majesty. And in general, he didn't like him. Finally, the Crown Prince ordered the gates to be opened. All the servants met the master and inquired about his stay in the capital, and everything seemed to be as usual. But the young man noticed that someone was missing. He asked Bartz where Miranda and Leona were, and the servant hesitated a little, and then replied that they were involved in an investigation and were now on probation. Casey, standing behind His Majesty, was very shocked by this news, but Carmine seemed to freeze in place. Bartz explained that these maids will not be able to perform their duties until the investigation is completed. The servant wondered why the master was silent, and when he dared to raise his head in anticipation of a stern face, he saw only the master's smile. "Ha ha ha, I knew she was unusual, but this is just something else." The Crown Prince laughed heartily. He informed the stunned servants that he would rest with Nacha in the garden and dismissed them. Laughing until he cried, the prince told Bartz to pass on his orders that Miranda and Leona be cleared of all charges, and that Leona be sent to him. Then His Majesty, accompanied by his faithful friend, headed into the garden. The servants looked after them with open mouths. It was an unusual sight. They had no idea that His Highness could laugh. As he walked deeper into the garden, Carmine couldn't stop laughing and wondered where this crazy maid had come from. And then I thought seriously, it is impossible to understand whether she is really an ordinary maid. She is very reasonable and knows how to quickly react to a situation. These are definitely not innate abilities. Perhaps she is a spy from another country. But what can he do if this is so? "Your Highness, I heard you wanted to see me." Leona's voice interrupted his thoughts. Carmine confirmed this and, to the girl's great surprise, said that Nach had a gift. "Take this." Nacha insisted on buying the bandage. The prince held out the box. Leona thanked him cautiously, and the horse rubbed his muzzle against the girl's cheek, making sounds like a purring kitten. And to Carmine's surprise, the girl asked the horse if he wanted her to open the box right then, as if she understood him without words. It was strange for the Crown Prince to see Natch treat anyone like that, but what he saw next amazed him even more. "It looks good." Leona unwrapped the gift and tried on the bandage, blushing from such attention. It was the first time she had received such a gift, and she sincerely thanked Nacha, and the horse snorted cheerfully in response. The young man silently watched these tendernesses and suddenly remembered why he came here. "Sorry to interrupt you two, but we need to remove Nacha's saddle," he said, which actually made Leona remember that they weren't alone here, and Nacha looked very unhappy. The horse's entire appearance literally drove its owner away, but Carmine still did what he wanted. "By the way, I realized something. Servants in the palace are required to wear uniforms, and colorful jewelry is prohibited, but this is a gift from Nach, so you have my personal permission," said the Crown Prince. Leona thanked him sincerely for this and looked straight into his eyes, causing the man's ears to turn slightly red. And then the girl suggested giving Nacha a bath. Carmine didn't immediately understand what they wanted from him, but then he finally agreed. Leona thanked him again and said that she would prepare the water. The girl went to do her job under close scrutiny, but Nacha snorted quietly and went after her. Without even looking at his owner, the horse quickly caught up with Leona and walked next to her. Carmine actually wanted to be with them, and it was a little offensive that he had taken care of him for so many years, and now the horse didn't even turn around. In the deceptive silence of the garden, Carmine was left alone, well, almost alone. "Jahan-gun, is it you?" the young man asked quietly, and received an affirmative answer. His guest had returned with news. And this news was not good. The northwestern border had fallen. The Katago tribe was quickly advancing south. "How is that? I thought the great general was standing at the border," asked the crown prince, but in response he received that the general had been killed. When asked whether the Katago tribe had contributed to this, Jahan answered in the negative. It seemed that someone inside had helped. The traitor had given the tribe all the information about the main strongholds. In a few days, a messenger would bring this news to the capital. "War is on the doorstep," Carmine said thoughtfully. It was sad news, but Carmine smiled resolutely. He needed to discuss this with the emperor. The days in the palace flowed as usual, and there was nothing outstanding about them, except for one thing. When she passed by, the attention of all the maids was invariably riveted to her, and some girls even decided to attract her attention. "Leona!" came a timid cry, and the girl turned around. The maid wanted to give Leona some cosmetics that were hard to get but good quality, to which Leona replied that she appreciated it but refused. "Oh, that's how it is. Call me if you ever need me," the maid said regretfully, and Leona thanked her. "It's been 5 days since Heather and Sonia were taken into custody, and their associates have been questioned." Ellie, Sonia's personal maid, also testified, and as a result, the servants, who could easily be seduced by the jingle of coins, were expelled from the palace, and the situation among the maids became tense. And suddenly, something unusual happened. The prince allowed one maid to wear a colorful decoration. Now, others believe that Leona is after the prince, although the armband was given to her by Nacha, and this gave her a certain power in the palace. But there is no time to be distracted by other people's views. There are more important things. "What were you thinking about?" the voice brought Leona out of her reverie. Mrs. Ellie stood right in front of her, but Leona didn't notice. Miranda asked if she had answered all the maid's questions, and Ellie sheepishly replied that she had told His Highness everything personally. Then Ellie apologized and asked Miranda to let her and Leona talk alone, to which the girl immediately replied that she would go to His Highness. "I was worried that you would be embarrassed to tell me everything. How are you?" Leona asked, and Ellie replied that her wounds had been examined and they had been very kind, so everything was fine. Leona asked if this meant that the case was closed, and her interlocutor smiled for the first time. "Yes, the case is closed." Ellie smiled happily and thanked Leona because it was all thanks to her. "Well, I have to go. I still need to hand everything over to the head maid of the Imperial Palace." The maid soon said goodbye. However, Ellie did not go far, as to her surprise she saw the chief maid in the prince's palace. Something was clearly wrong, and it dawned on Leon what it was. Having quickly apologized to Mrs. Ellie, she hurried to His Majesty. Leona stood in a row of servants awaiting the prince's orders and thought about the fact that the head maid was allowed to see the emperor and was rarely allowed out of the imperial palace, so that she could always be approached if she came. It meant that the ruler himself ordered it. The more the girl watched, the more she became convinced that everything was beginning. In her past life, a terrible rumor spread today. The Katago tribe crossed the border. The enemies began to invade. The border territories were plundered. The nobles were executed, and the inhabitants were driven out of their homes. The fortress and a couple of cities were captured. The Katago riders quickly advanced to the lands of Valf, where the main grain reserves are. Last time, the emperor did convene an urgent council, but they were too late, and Valfa's fortress fell. As tensions mounted, the emperor was forced to make a statement. He appointed the crown prince as the chief commander in the war against the Katago and sent his son into battle. The Valfa fortress stood on the lands of Valfa since the founding of the empire. No one could have imagined that the fortress would one day be taken. As soon as news of what had happened spread throughout the palace, the emperor locked himself in his chambers, and the council began to hold endless meetings. Everyone was afraid that the tribe would soon reach the capital, and only one person in the palace remained calm. All the servants' eyes were directed only at him. While the ruler of the state and the most important persons of the empire could not even agree with each other, His Highness thought about how to get out of the terrible situation. "Your Highness, please help. We beg you." People literally fell to their knees and begged His Highness to save them, and as a result, all the subjects turned to him. His composure calmed the hearts of the people. The crown prince then asked for an audience with the emperor, and soon after their conversation, the emperor left the room and then sent his son off to war. After all that had happened, His Highness gave instructions to his faithful knights. Gerard addressed His Highness with respect. "You should have heard about it all by now. I'm going to war. Glenn is preparing, so help him if he asks," the prince said. And he added that he didn't need any escorts. They would only get in the way. Gerard was unhappy that His Majesty did not allow them to serve him and follow him either to the battlefield or to the fiery pit. "Okay, 3, I'll take 3, no more." Carmine gave in under pressure from the chamberlain. "I'll go too," a clear female voice rang out, and everyone looked at its owner in surprise. Leona walked through the crowd of servants and fell on her knees before His Majesty, asking to be allowed to go with him. "Ha! No way!" His Majesty didn't hesitate for a second. Leona was not going to give in so easily and insisted. "Are you really deaf to the words of the prince? I have said my word." Carmine raised his voice, and Gerard came to his senses. Jumping up to the girl, the old man asked her to get up, but Leona persistently asked to go with His Highness. "Leona, you are always stubborn at the strangest moments," the prince noted. He no longer asks politely and demands that she back down, to which the girl reluctantly replied that she understood. "What was that? I thought you had a head on your shoulders. You at least understand how busy His Highness is preparing for war," the chamberlain scolded the girl as soon as they returned to the servants' wing, indignant that at such a moment she was making a scene. She would have been punished if the prince's departure had not been on their nose, and she should thank the higher powers. Leona realized her guilt, and so she stood silently until she was called out. "Mr. Gerard is always strict but rarely raises his voice. I was wondering what happened," Bartz asked cautiously. The girl said without further ado that she had asked to go to war, which caused sighs of horror. Leona confirmed that she really wanted to accompany the prince, and Bartz asked if His Highness had agreed, to which the girl answered negatively. "Although I'll go anyway," Leona said to the servants' amazement. "No matter what the prince says, Leona is not going to retreat. She needs to get to the battlefield. There is one matter that must be dealt with, otherwise Viota cannot be defeated." The day after the announcement of the prince's departure, a lot happened. The Department of Order found Sonia guilty of the crimes. She used the nomadic script and tried to frame another maid. During the investigation, it was also revealed that she had been embezzling money that was being put aside for the maids' pensions, had stolen funds from the chamberlain's subordinates, and had often raised her hand against the servants. Sonia's punishment was exile, and Heather, who helped her, was imprisoned for 3 years. Odell appointed another person to be responsible for the Crown Prince's palace, Mrs. Cindy. Greeting His Majesty, Cindy promised to do everything possible so that he would not lack anything. The prince responded with the hope that she would become a worthy companion for Gerard. Cindy was taciturn and smiled little. She had already realized that the prince did not like to waste time on formalities. Odell had made a good choice. Leona remembers Cindy as a cautious person who avoided palace intrigues for years. She also held a high position in her past life, but she won't eat it. Remains to be hoped that Cindy won't fall into the Empress's net. While the girl was thoughtfully looking after the new senior maid, she was called out. "Leona, what is this strange taste of tea?" asked the Crown Prince. The girl replied that it was ginger. It warms the body and helps with colds. "But I'm healthy," the prince noted with displeasure. Then he ordered her to stop and just bring some mint tea, but the maid only pretended to cover her mouth with her hand. To His Highness's further displeasure, Leona apologized and explained that the mint leaves had gone bad and they would not be able to brew it. "They were stored incorrectly, so we threw everything away," the girl said, upset. And with indescribable emotions, which, however, Carmine caught, she said that he would have to endure the ginger tea, but it was good for him. Carmine at this time noticed something on the table and pointed his finger at it, asking what it was. Leona explained that it was a pie, and that it was so red because it happened that way, but that was okay. Pepper was also good for your health, and she had prepared it especially for him. Miranda and Bartz watched this conversation with surprise. "I tried my best. Try this." Leona insistently offered the pepper pie. Carmine recoiled and was ordered to take it away from him because he hated spicy food and the maid knew it. "How should I know? Really, I'm so sorry," the girl said, genuinely upset. But the man understood the reasons for her behavior. "Leona, I don't approve of your request because of such nonsense," he noted, and the girl laughed, not understanding what he was talking about. Carmine sighed wearily. He felt out of place because of the ginger tea. That's right, so far Leona has never been wrong about his preferences. Therefore, there is only one conclusion: she knows everything that he hates. Night fell, but even here everything was not entirely calm. As he was getting ready for bed, the crown prince became angry when he saw this in his room. A servant appeared in response to the master's displeased call. The blanket is thicker than usual, why His Highness was indignant, and in response he received that it was his personal maid who insisted that the gentleman needed to take care of his health before leaving, so she made a down blanket. When asked if it was Leona, the servant answered in the affirmative. Madame Leona's devotion to His Highness knows no bounds. "Okay, you can go," Carmine replied wearily. He thought that this was too much on the maid's part and didn't know what to do. Sitting down at the table, the young man took a sip from his glass, but immediately regretted it, as he felt as if his insides were burning. Next to the glass stood a decanter, and next to it was a note from the maid. "Your Highness, I specially ordered mulled wine. It will warm you up, so drink a cup before bed." Carmina shook with heat and indignation. "She's going to drive me crazy." An indignant cry echoed through the evening air, frightening the birds in the area. The girls, heading to their room, stopped in confusion, as if they had heard something, but decided that it was just birds screaming. "By the way, Leona, do you really want to go there?" Miranda asked, referring to the battlefield and worried that it was dangerous. Leona replied that she would be in the camp anyway, so there was nothing to worry about. She would not be allowed to fight. And since His Highness is against it, Leona wages a war of attrition with him. The maid has been pestering the prince ever since he refused her. The prince is irritated by all this, but he will seem petty and picky to the servants if he says anything. And the prince himself believes that giving in to whims is beneath his dignity, so he will not punish her. Miranda noticed that her friend was serious, but suddenly His Highness still wouldn't agree. "Then I will follow him secretly," Leona stunned her friend. Before leaving, the prince expressed a desire to conduct training, although in reality he was simply venting his irritation on his subordinates. The maid brought the gentleman a cup of water to refresh himself. The crown prince thanked him, but then his gaze lingered on the tray. The water in the cup was so hot that it was steaming. After a brief argument about not needing hot water after training, Carmine just sighed wearily. He was going to ignore her antics until he left, but it was annoying. Couldn't he somehow stop her? And then it dawned on the young man. He called the girl and she immediately responded. And the prince had a wonderful idea, and he was going to use it. Even the knights and Miranda listened in surprise as the prince praised the maid and said that she looked tired. "Yes, certainly. What kind of master would I be if I allowed you to wear yourself out?" the prince added with concern, and suggested that she take a break from her duties. "Until his departure, Leon can relax, and this is an order." His Highness finished with a smile, but the girl wasn't so happy about it. She thanked him calmly for his concern, too calmly and submissively. Carmine was surprised by this reaction, but noticed that she was clearly surprised, perhaps planning something. Or she just gave up. The young man smiled contentedly at his thoughts. His Highness's mood improved, and he ordered his knights to rest for the day. Miranda whispered to Leona that they would see each other later and followed the departing prince. "Shoo, the prince has been in a bad mood lately. He skinned us alive during training. I'm glad he's calmed down," Casey noted, heading off to do his business. After taking a couple of steps, he came across Mrs. Leona standing alone. The knight heard that she asked to go to the battlefield with His Highness. Apparently this is true, but even he would not take a woman without training, even if she is exceptionally smart. To war, however, it is painful to see how sad she is. Are you okay, Madam?" Casey asked. He expected to see a sad face of the girl, but what he saw surprised him. Leona's expression was focused. She thought that the prince had decided to change the rules of the game, but she still thanked the knight for his concern, saying that she was fine. Slightly frightened by the maid's behavior, Casey hurried to say goodbye, but Leona stopped him, frightening him even more. "Deputy Casey, I have a favor to ask. I want to learn how to clean armor and weapons," the girl said. "That's usually what my squires do," Casey began hesitantly, but Leona gave him a look that made him hesitate. "But tomorrow I'll find someone to help you, or let's start right now." The knight immediately changed his shoes and answered with inspiration. "That's great," the girl answered evenly. A little later, goods were being unloaded at the eastern gate of the palace. "Hey, this needs to be delivered to the prince's palace. There are fragile things there, be careful," the middle-aged man commanded when he saw the maid approaching him. As expected from the head of the largest trade guild in the empire, "You are all business," the girl flattered him. Mr. Org was incredibly happy to see Mrs. Leona. The man was embarrassed and replied that helping with the preparations for the war was an honor for the guild, and also thanked her for the advice. They also brought enough dried dates and persimmons, and what she asked for. At these words, Leona perked up. In the hands of Mr. Org was a bucket filled to the brim with grenades. The girl sincerely thanked him and left as she thought, buying garnets through the trading guild is profitable and the quality is excellent. She sincerely hopes that he will like it. On the way, Leona met Mr. Bartz, who quietly beckoned her to him. On your advice, I submitted documents on shortening the prince's departure ceremony. He approved everything, although Mr. Gerard complained that it was too simple for a send-off, complained Bartz. The servant understood that Leona's participation must remain a secret from the chamberlain, and fortunately, Monsieur Gerard was too busy with preparations, and also added that he had found an assistant's uniform in her size, but asked why she needed it. I'm just preparing in case His Highness approves. It will be uncomfortable in skirts. The girl laughed, trying to calm him down. And Bartz really calmed down. He was already worried that she was going to secretly follow His Majesty, to which Leona added that she was not so reckless. Having said goodbye to Mr. Bartz, the girl continued on her way, and soon she stopped again, seeing something she didn't expect. Jahangun was walking towards her, handsome and unperturbed as usual. But the young man walked past silently, not even paying attention to Leona. But the girl became interested, not expecting to meet him here. Have you come to look at the tea flowers? Leona asked, and the guest stopped. And she offered him one of the pomegranates, immediately saying that it was a bribe. She had heard that he would accompany His Highness on the campaign, and asked him to take care of her on the battlefield. Okay, I just wanted to say hello. I won't bother you anymore. I apologize. Jahan took the pomegranate, but didn't say a word when Leona left. The young man looked at the round red fruit in his hand for some time. Next report, came a stern but tired voice. The council for war with the Katago tribe had been going on for several days. It seemed that the chief of the tribe, Sher Taru, was mortally ill. Before the war began, he had announced that he would pass the title to the Haru son of the chief. Several of his sons had military accomplishments, and from what the council had heard, either the 8th or 13th Har would lead the tribe. Both of them would be involved in the war. Carmine listened to the nervous talk of the council about the chief sending them together, and essentially using their lands to determine the heir, but the prince was interested in what the Katago's next target would be. "Hyren, your highness," replied the captain of the New Moon Squad, Maki. It turns out that they are moving towards the capital without hesitation, and the Empire has already sent a messenger to the ruler of Hayran and ordered him to immediately surrender the lands and save the people. They are separated by a river, so the tribe will need time to get to the other bank, and they will take advantage of this, set up an ambush in the Tagoya forest. In addition, it is necessary to order the owners of the western lands to send soldiers to the fortress. We must not let the enemy pass beyond the forest, the Crown Prince ordered, and his order was accepted by the military leaders. Without further ado, the military leaders set off to carry out the order. The Crown Prince looked at Maki thoughtfully. He was a skilled swordsman who had seen many battles, a reliable man. But the Emperor didn't like him for his sharp tongue. Makia seems very straightforward. Carmine realized that it looks like he'll have to deal with stubborn old men until the end of the war. Thinking about how hard his life was, Carmine looked out the window. And I saw an interesting scene there. Leona was carrying a knight's helmet in her hands, and Casey was jumping around her worriedly. The knight was seriously worried, but the girl looked confident. Carmine stuck to the window and said out loud what she had in mind. The people in the room with him asked him again what he had said, and the prince came to his senses and said that they were finished for the day. Everyone left except for the chancellor, who lingered at the door. The man would like to ask a question about their last conversation when they discussed his daughter's engagement. He was very interested in when His Highness would make an announcement, to which the prince reminded them of the situation they were in. The war was already underway, and there was no time for engagements. "Right now I need to focus on the war," Carmine said sternly. The chancellor tried to object, but the prince added that they would discuss it when he returned. Meanwhile, the armory was fairly calm. That same knight's helmet stood in its place, polished to a shine. With a sense of accomplishment, Leona closed the door to the armory. "Ms. Leona, someone saw you." Casey was very scared, but the girl said that there was no one in the armory and thought that it did not matter. "What do you mean there's a scratch on the Crown Prince's helmet?" The knight exploded with indignation, and then he looked around warily, hoping that no one had really seen them. "For a large man, you are surprisingly timid," Leona calmly noted. But the knight did not stop shouting that she asked to be taught how to clean armor, but used the prince's helmet for training. "It was you who made a fuss and snatched the helmet to inspect it, and then dropped it, deputy." the girl noted, and tears appeared in Casey's eyes. The grown man squatted down like a child and admitted that he was guilty. Leona tried as best she could to calm him down, because it was a small scratch, no one would notice. But the knight did not calm down. He lamented why this happened right before the departure of His Highness. Suddenly he would now be haunted by failures, and the girl understood that this was a difficult case. "Deputy Casey, listen. You will have no influence on the prince's fate," the girl said in such a tone that the man immediately looked at her. Every word the girl said hit him like an arrow. "Do you think that an ordinary deputy will ruin his war? You can even throw the prince's armor on the ground and trample on it. He will not even notice, because in his eyes you are the same as dirt under his fingernails. Let's put conceit aside and return to common sense." The more Leona spoke, the more her words fell on the knight's shoulders like heavy stones. He finally calmed down, and Leona assured him that he had nothing to worry about. But Casey didn't believe her. "I'll explain. His Highness will win. I'm even ready to bet," said the girl. Casey was taken aback. The words of Mrs. Leona instilled confidence in him. The girl smiled. He doesn't know that her words are prophecies and not empty dreams. She already knows the outcome. The Crown Prince will crush the Katago tribe, and the reason she is asking to help is that one of the events of the war will be the beginning of the prince's downfall. In his past life, the prince drove the tribe beyond the borders, but secretly from everyone. He made a treaty with the 13th Har. The condition was simple. If the Katago tribe does not encroach on the rights of the empire, the crown prince will conclude an alliance with the nomads as soon as he ascends the throne. The empress then ordered Leon to forge the treaty. She was to change the contents to accuse the prince of conspiring with the tribe and preparing an uprising. "But the 13th Hara has a copy. The truth will be revealed if we do this," the maid noted. Viota was adamant. Soon the 13th son was killed by the 8th after the treaty was concluded, and the 8th Har accused the crown prince of killing his brother, and then burned the treaty. Now he is the ruler of the tribe. No one else in the world knows about this agreement. From that day on, Leona realized that the empress's influence had spread beyond the palace. As she had predicted, the prince was accused of treason and stripped of all his titles. At that moment, the maid felt respect for the empress. But now she can't get lost in the past. She must take care of the future, and she knows exactly how to protect the prince. Leona will keep the contract and not let the 13th Haru die. This is her goal. Preparations were in full swing at the crown prince's palace, and documents arrived from the servants. Carmine studied them carefully and became slightly irritated. Among the documents was a request for an escort from Leona, where she stated the desire to protect the empire, the prince, and the future as the reason. But isn't that too high-flown? Having finished reading the letter, the prince crumpled the sheet of paper and threw it away. Jahan walked in just as the crumpled paper landed on the floor by the door. "This is garbage. Throw it away," said Carmine to his friend. But Jahan unfolded the letter and began to read it, which made the prince indignant that no one in the palace was listening to him now. "Why don't you agree, Carmine? Maybe she can help with something," Jahan asked, and the prince stared at him in surprise. The crown prince did not believe that he was serious. There was no room for games in war. "But it's a game to you, isn't it?" Jahan goaded him, implying that he was taking her request too seriously. But Carmine frowned. He strictly said that he would not change the composition of the squad. "Carmine, are you worried about her?" This question took the prince by surprise. Jahan went on to say that if this was not the case, then it was reasonable to admit that an extra pair of hands would not be amiss. In addition, he will be able to find out her true nature, something that Carmine had not previously thought about. This new offer, so tempting, seemed to hang in the air. "Although it's unlikely that your opinion plays any role, she has already prepared for everything herself," Jahan noted as if by chance. The prince asked in bewilderment what he was talking about, and his friend replied that the maid even had her own corner in the carriage. The more Jahan continued to say that she had a bed, a table, and the things she needed for the campaign there, so she would surely follow them, the more the prince's mouth opened in surprise. The collections were in full swing. "There are clothes, medicines, and warm blankets too," the girl listed. Leona was glad that everything was ready and generally perfect. A few days ago, she secretly began preparing for the trip, asking Org to give her a place in one of the carriages, but he overdid it and created a small room on wheels. At first she was hesitant, but convenience is also important. Reaching to adjust the curtains, Leona looked out the carriage window and was stunned. Outside, the servant stood and looked at her, and His Majesty, who was very displeased, stood there. "Why are you here?" The girl was surprised, but the prince did not answer, but only took a step into the carriage, his gaze burning. "Not badly arranged," Carmine noted, and his eyes acquired a fiery green hue. Seeing this, Leona became a little scared, and then she hastened to apologize, saying that she would accept any punishment. "I can hear the wheels creaking in your head from here. What's the point of punishing you? You'll go anyway," the prince grinned. The girl was silent, not knowing what to answer. His Majesty let out a tired sigh, noticing that she didn't even deny it. "Okay, Leona, have it your way." The girl was taken aback by what she heard, but she was very happy and began to sincerely thank His Highness. Leona promised to try to be useful and not let him down, to which the prince ordered her to pack her things. The happy maid received congratulations from the other servants. The crown prince, his eyes green, looked at the girl with displeasure, but then turned away, having difficulty controlling his anger. A few days later, the time of departure arrived, along with the celebration that took place during it. The crown prince of the empire, dressed in armor and wearing a blue cloak, sat on a war horse, and the solemn ceremony began. Leona was finishing her preparations when she noticed that the sound was getting louder and realized that there were already marching people in the square. She was worried that she wouldn't have time to pick up the purchases she left at the hotel, but it seemed she worried for nothing. "Mrs. Leona, where are you? Why did you disappear at such an important moment?" A young blonde man attacked her. It was Mr. Knoll, to whom the girl replied that she needed to buy feminine products, which made the young man hesitate and blush. "Just hurry up, we're leaving soon," he shouted at last. Noel is a servant in the Crown Prince's palace. He was chosen as an assistant. Leona and Bartz will go with him. Noel is only 19 years old, no experience, but he is the strongest among the servants, that's why they took him. Leona assumed that he was difficult to get along with, but he was responsible, and she needed to take a closer look at him since they were going to travel together. Suddenly the cart moved, they set off. The holiday was in full swing. The residents clapped joyfully, seeing the heroes off to war. Leona sat in the carriage and listened to the sounds of the celebration outside. As soon as she closes her eyes, she immediately sees that scene. "Capture the nobles, kill the emperor, the empire will fall!" the angry people shouted. It was noisy then, but also very scary. Leona watched this horror with tears in her eyes, realizing that she had unknowingly contributed to it. Toot-toot, the sound of a festive trumpet tore the girl out of her memories. She peered out from behind the curtains, noticing that the residents had become more active. The crown prince was riding past on horseback, looking reserved and serious, and carrying the hope of the entire empire on his shoulders. Leona listened thoughtfully as the people chanted, "Long life to the crown prince, may the empire live forever." Today, this ceremony appeared to her in a different light in her past life. She was only a detached observer in the crowd. The crown prince has more noble blood than anyone else, and he is ready to give his life for the empire. But before, Leone didn't care about him. She wondered why she hadn't noticed it then, and suddenly Leone remembered the emperor. Now people are seeing off the air, and the old ruler is locked in the palace and watches from afar. And Leona seriously doubted that he liked such a sight. The girl left the capital for the first time since becoming a servant, but for a long time the imperial palace loomed before her eyes. Soon the procession stopped for a rest, and it was time to have lunch. Leona climbed out of the cart. She took some motion sickness medicine, but her head was still spinning. She was surprised that everyone seemed accustomed to such trips. And then I heard someone's worried voice asking about Mr. Bartz's well-being. Leona even felt better that she wasn't the only one who was having trouble with the trip. She approached the poor fellow and asked if he had taken his motion sickness medicine, and also suggested that he rest and that Mr. Knoll look after him. She tied her hair and stood before them in full gear. The girl volunteered to check the others. Leona had already managed to change her clothes, and now she was wearing a male servant's uniform, which was much more comfortable than a long skirt. The men gasped at her appearance, and the girl hurried to visit His Highness. She found the prince nearby. He was helping his friend. "You held up well. It's gotten easier," asked Carmine, removing Nock's armor. Feeling the freedom of movement, the horse went to the stern, and Carmine mentally praised Nock. Casey volunteered to help His Highness change his clothes, but he refused, noting that he could handle it himself, and that the deputy also needed to change. "This form is not suitable for travel, and tell the others so," the prince said to his surprised deputy. Casey understood the order and went to carry it out. As soon as he left, Carmine remembered that he hadn't brought a change of clothes with him, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a comfortable raincoat appeared in front of his nose. "Please, Your Highness." The maid handed the gentleman a change of clothes. The crown prince was very surprised by the girl's appearance and asked why she was wearing trousers. "It will be easier for me to help you this way," Leona answered with a smile, not paying attention to the knight's glances. Then she asked if she would bring him lunch, to which the prince replied that he would eat with the commanders, but instead asked that food be brought to Jahan Gun, and the girl rushed to carry out the order. "Strange woman," Carmine sighed as the girl ran away. The horses rested, ate, and gained strength for the rest of the journey. Nacha suddenly raised his head from the water and looked to the side with interest. Leona stood nearby and held out a ripe, large pomegranate to the horse. "You must have gotten tired while running in heavy armor. Well done." The girl stroked the horse's muzzle, which snorted contentedly. While the prince's maid was feeding Nacha pomegranates, Jahan Gun was resting nearby. "There are only light snacks here, so your tummy won't hurt," Leona said, opening the picnic basket next to him. The girl understood from one glance that he was interested in how she knew his food preferences, but she couldn't say that his past life was helping him out. Besides, he wouldn't believe it, so she just smiled and wished him to enjoy his food. And then she calmly left, leaving the young man alone. The main role in the upcoming war will be played by 2 squads, the personal guard of the Prince Blue Falcon and the 1st Cavalry Squad of the Empire New Moon. However, the squads are complete opposites. Like oil and water, they simply cannot coexist, so they work separately. The Blue Falcon squad members are similar to their leader Glenn. They are sociable and quickly get used to everything. But New Moon's subordinates, under the command of the stern Makia, became strict and aloof. Therefore, the representatives of the squads do not know how to get along with each other, and the prince felt this fully during dinner. Carmine could literally feel the oppressive atmosphere in the air. They gathered to discuss plans over food, but Makia's stony face made his stomach churn. "If you're finished, I'm ready to serve tea." Leona appeared with a tray as soon as the prince put down his spoon. The maid prepared mint tea for His Highness, and when the gentleman asked him fairly whether the mint leaves had gone bad, she replied that she had asked Mr. Org to bring more before leaving. Carmine decided to forgive her since the tea was delicious, and Leona meanwhile offered Commander Glenn some jasmine tea. She had tea for Commander Makia as well, but the man only glanced at her. "No need," said the stern commander, and turned away. The maid did not insist and hurried away. "Be careful, Makia. This woman might even put a snake in your bed," the prince joked. But the commander didn't see a problem with that, because real soldiers never sleep soundly and are always ready. The prince didn't mean this, but he didn't explain anything to the commander, watching the girl leave. Similar situations happened over and over again. "Put all the tents on the plain. Let the supply wagons stand in one row on the left. The fire is too weak. Collect more firewood." Orders were heard from all sides. After the meal, the prince and his commanders returned to the camp and froze in amazement. "Please, Your Highness, no insects will get to you now." Leona stood near the large pink canopy over the bed, which the servants had managed to assemble in their absence. Carmine was indignant about where the bed had come from and why it was so colorful, demanding that it be removed immediately, but the light in the tent immediately attracted gnats. "Should I definitely remove the insect screen?" the girl asked, and the prince had to tell her to leave it. The maid also gave the commanders some insect repellent, which Glenn gratefully took, but Makia again refused. "There is no need, I don't need it." The girl felt metal in the commander's voice, but again she did not insist and only wished him good dreams. Having finished her work already in the dark, Leona took a lantern and headed to her cart. Before the girl had time to get there, someone called her by name. It was a young man with silver hair in the uniform of the New Moon Squad. Leona recognized him. It was Mr. Jonathan, the commander of the first group of the New Moon Squad. He apologized for the captain's rudeness and explained that he was not thrilled to have a woman on the battlefield, so he might seem cold, but he did not want to offend her. "I understand that it is difficult for the captain to express his feelings, but he is a kind person, I know," the girl said with a smile. Jonathan was pleased with such a reaction and warmly thanked the assistant lady for her understanding. Having asked to be called Leona, the girl said goodbye to Jonathan. Frankly speaking, she doesn't care at all how Makia treats her. Even if he insults her, it won't interfere with her work. Makia is a great commander. His military achievements are admired by the entire empire, but in her past life, the emperor hated him for protecting the crown prince. Machi tried to prove His Highness's innocence, but the empress would never allow him to do so, and as a result, Machi was called a traitor. He was imprisoned and brutally interrogated, and the tendons in all his limbs were cut. When the crown prince was exiled, Makia was released, but he was never able to pick up a sword. Makia renounced his title and voluntarily left the empire with his family. If he had been with them then, perhaps the Hamel Empire would not have fallen so easily to the invasion of the Allied States. This military leader protects both the empire and the crown prince, so let him ignore her. Leona still respects him. That's what she always believed, and will continue to believe. But it's good to know that Makia is not alone. The soldiers support him. On the 10th day of the hike, it started to rain heavily. The knights complained that the rain did not stop. The horses stumbled, and the wheels of the carts got stuck in the mud, making it difficult to continue walking. Your Highness, due to the difficult conditions, no one was able to relax during the journey. Usually the journey from the palace to the Tagoya forest takes a month, but we covered half the distance in just 10 days. Maybe we should rest a little, suggested Makia. The prince agreed to his proposal and ordered tents to be erected, and with the joint efforts of the knights and servants, they set up camp in the rain. Leona also took part as much as she could. She ran through the puddles, now offering Mr. Noel a cloak and asking him to help with the cart, now bringing Mr. Bartz an umbrella and asking him to make sure the prince's tent was set up. Phew, where's the prince? Leona was inspired. Suddenly, the girl saw something unusual. Where did the carriage come from in the middle of the forest in such a downpour? I told you not to interfere, why aren't you listening? The crown prince's cry was heard. I specifically ordered everyone to forget about formalities and not come near. You can interfere with the campaign. My words are empty sounds to you. The crown prince scolded those who arrived in the carriage, and they tried to justify themselves by saying that they were worried about the prince. Therefore, we hoped that you would rest in our estate until the rain subsided. The frightened nobles continued to fawn. They have prepared a place to relax and would also like to present a gift. Viscount, I remember you had a bad harvest this year. Your people were starving and begged for a reduction in taxes. If you have the means for carriages and jewelry, perhaps you could take care of your subjects, His Highness rightly noted. The nobles froze in place in horror, so Carmine had to shout at them. Once the unexpected visitors had left, the prince was left standing in the rain, surrounded by knights. But no one dared to say anything to him, because they understood that he was furious. Then there was one brave man who dared to approach His Highness. You'll get sick if you stand in the rain, Leona worried, and brought the prince an umbrella. The girl carried an umbrella over her head, not noticing that the man could not see the road due to his height, and said that his tent should already be ready. Carmine didn't resist, accepting the care, and Leona simply smiled, waiting for his reaction. His Highness's eyes, which had been glowing with green fire just a minute ago, were acquiring their usual color. Okay, let's go, the prince said more softly, and everyone around him opened their mouths in amazement. The man snatched the umbrella from the surprised girl's hands. Lead us to the tent already, the crown prince ordered. Leona hesitated slightly, surprised by his behavior, and then said that they were going to the right. Wow, what a brave assistant. She remained calm in front of the angry prince. His Highness really appreciates her. Now it's clear why, the knights admired. Meanwhile, His Highness and his maid reached the crown prince's tent. Leona brought a towel and a change of clothes, and the prince allowed her to enter. And only then did the girl look up and was stunned with surprise. Carmine was just about to wash himself and suggested that she leave everything there, and also warn the others if they were looking for him. The prince's shirt was unbuttoned. Raindrops were running down his bare, pumped-up chest. Leona could barely answer that she understood the order. As she left, she decided to collect her clothes before he returned. The girl reached for her things when she noticed some dark object. Carmine left the bath with a feeling of relief. Bathing makes even the most unpleasant situation bearable. But he was distracted by Leona's excited voice. Your Highness, urgently, you seem to have forgotten something. The maid held a medal in her hands. She found this thing in his scattered clothes, is very surprised that she interrupts, but losing something like this would be unforgivable. Just throw it somewhere, it's not that important, the prince answered casually, and he continued to wipe himself, leaving the girl perplexed. It is a military insignia and a symbol of imperial power. Only the ruler of the state can wear the insignia, and if it was given to a prince, it means that the current emperor is betting everything on this war. His Highness must be feeling a lot of pressure, and yet his behavior is unusual. If he had even a drop of desire for power, he would not have treated the sign so carelessly. Is the prince not interested in ruling? As if he is ready to let go of everything if necessary. The rain poured down without stopping, flooding everything around. Your Highness, I have brought some cold plum tea, Leona said as she entered the tent, and I was very surprised by what I saw. The crown prince had already changed his clothes and was sitting, languishing in the heat. Because of the rain, the brazier had to be moved inside, as she thought it had become too hot in there. "Your Highness, if you are hot, perhaps you should change your clothes," the girl suggested, adding that she had brought clothes made from the fabric used by the inhabitants of the Bukruman desert, a breathable material so it would make him feel cooler. When the prince asked if the palace had taken care of this, he was surprised to learn that Leona herself had asked to sell them these clothes. "We are heading northwest, where the climate is often unpredictable. I heard that the nights here are cold and the day can be hot, like in the desert, Your Highness. You are sensitive to heat, so I brought other clothes," said the maid. Carmine was amazed that she had prepared and thoughtfully approached the trip. But still, something seemed strange to him, and Leona asked what exactly. "You know about my sensitivity to heat, but in the palace you laid out a down blanket for me?" Carmine did not miss the opportunity to reproach. The girl was taken aback by such a direct reproach, and she couldn't find anything to say in response, even though she tried to justify herself. Seeing her attempts, the man almost laughed and couldn't hold back his smile. "Okay, we forgot. Help me change." He extended his hand. Confused, Leona set about her work. When everything was finished, a servant looked into the tent with the message that Captain Makia and Captain Glenn wanted to discuss something with His Highness. Carmine ordered them to be called here, and Leona hastened to take her leave. Pulling up her hood, the girl left the tent with relief. She asked Mr. Bartz, who was waiting outside, to put out the brazier. Otherwise, His Highness would throw her out himself, and she went to check on Natcha. Leona had hoped to cope quickly, but the search for Natch in the rain dragged on. She literally ran through the forest in search of His Majesty's horse. As she thought, he was not with the horses, but he was not near the carts either. Where could he be? The girl began to worry. And at that moment, I saw Natch calmly grazing. She called his name and the horse instantly perked up. "Were you hiding from the rain under a tree?" Leona asked, hurrying towards him with a basket. She wondered why he had gone out in such weather and added that she had brought him apples. "He's frozen. I hope the rain stops soon." Leona fed and stroked Natcha. She noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Another horse stood under a nearby tree, also hiding from the rain. At first she assumed it was an imperial horse, but she dismissed it. Otherwise the saddle would have their symbol. Perhaps it was Jahan Gun's horse. "Where is your master?" the girl asked, and the horse snorted, pointing upward. Only after this did the girl notice a man hiding in the crown of a tree. Looking at her basket full of apples, Leona asked Natch, "Do you think we could share the apples with our friend?" To which the horse's reaction was indignation. The girl understood that he didn't really want to share, but she asked again. Finally, His Majesty's horse stretched out his neck towards the other horse, which meant that he gave permission. "Natcha, you are so generous, a real hero!" The girl rushed to hug him. The idyllic scene was interrupted by someone's indignant voice. "Damn, it's all because of that damn prince?" The knight was indignant, while Jonathan tried to calm him down. He asked the deputy to watch his language and remember where they were. Leona recognized these people, the commander of the first group, Jonathan, and the deputy captain of the New Moon Squad, Stan. "I know you're upset about Jessie's injury, but she'll be fine. Auntie should get another horse for now," Jonathan told his deputy. But Stan was furious that they had been running all night, and that was why his horse was tired. If the prince had let them rest, Jessie would not have been hurt. His Highness is in a hurry, it is true, but how could it be otherwise? We are at war. We should not treat our enemy lightly. We need to prepare for the razor as soon as possible. Everyone understands this. That is why they do not complain, Jonathan noted. They had no choice but to give Jessie a rest, but Stan didn't like the fact that the other horses weren't doing so well. And then the deputy glanced to the side. There was a very strong-looking horse grazing under a tree, and he asked whose it was. Stan assumed the horse belonged to someone in charge of food supplies, but Jonathan recognized it immediately. "Wait, that horse belongs to the prince's comrade," Jonathan warned, but Stan was sure Jahan wasn't going to fight, so he would just ask for it back. "Take your hands off!" came a disgruntled cry, and the men turned around in surprise. Mrs. Leona was heading towards them, and she looked very warlike and confident. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Leona. Why are you outside on such a day?" Jonathan asked while Leona was feeding the horse some apples. The girl didn't even answer them, and the men could only watch in silence as she fed the horse. "You even look after his horse. You are close to the stranger, your assistant?" Stan asked rudely, and Jonathan pulled him up. Leona chose to remain silent. Stan has long served under Captain Makia and is also a gifted swordsman. So when Makia was locked in a cell in his past life, Stan tried to incite young soldiers to take over the prison, which is why he became a criminal and disappeared. Stan may not be too happy with the prince's decisions, but he won't cause any direct harm, and he'll be useful in battle. Stan needs to be with them now. The girl calmly said that she was not too close to him, but Mr. Jahan Gun was a dear friend of the prince, so she tried to serve him faithfully and truly, but Stan was unhappy. Why take another foreigner to war with foreigners? And what do you think about this? Stan suddenly asked Leon, meaning that he had to curry favor with a foreigner, the very sight of whom made him sick. Leona glanced up at the treetop, realizing that Jahan could hear everything. And she replied that she was simply His Majesty's maid, and if someone was important to the prince, then she would respect that person, and status and origin were of secondary importance. I'm sure everyone in the palace thinks so since we serve the same master, but you seem to think differently, the girl asked. These words hit the deputy in the sore spot, and he became angry. But at the same time, the man understood that if he said anything else, it could have bad consequences. The tense moment was interrupted by a disgruntled snort. Nacha approached them, his whole face seemed to say, "What kind of guy is this?" Staring angrily at our Leona, "Who do you think you are, biped?" Stan noticed the unfriendly look, but the whole situation suddenly seemed absurd to him, and he left. Jonathan quickly apologized to Leona and hurried after his deputy. And Leona at this time thanked Nacha for standing up for her. The rain had stopped, but it would be difficult to walk on the wet ground, so it was decided to rest today. "This concludes the meeting, you may go," the prince said to the captains. "Your Highness, since we have a short break, perhaps we should prepare a hearty dinner," Leona suggested. Hearing this, Makia suddenly stopped. Leona added that they were in a great hurry, which was taking a toll on the soldiers and horses, and that there was still a long way to go. "To keep up morale, perhaps we should give everyone more time to rest every other day and better food," Carmine said to this suggestion that soldiers were not that fragile. The girl added that even steel will bend under many blows. Even though they are soldiers, fatigue can undermine anyone. Besides, His Highness also eats very poorly, but the girl believes that he will make a wise decision. The girl folded her hands in prayer, and seeing that His Highness was not giving in, added a meaningful but, which worked, and Carmine agreed and approved her proposal on the condition that it be done once every 3 days. "I heard everything, Makia," the prince asked without turning around, and ordered that his words be conveyed to the soldiers and that the schedule be reviewed. The captain immediately confirmed the order. "Are you happy now?" Carmine asked the maid, and she respectfully said that she had expected nothing less from him. Captain New Moon just looked strangely at this unusual servant. After this, the camp became more lively. The knights were glad that His Highness had ordered a feast. "Today everyone will get meat." A joyful cry was heard, and Leona was happy for the happy knights. The guys looked so exhausted. It's good that now everyone feels better. Some people can't stand the grueling pace, but Leona hopes that this will at least lift everyone's spirits a little. And it was time for her to get back to work because of the rain. There was no chance to hang out the laundry. The girl thought about where to attach the rope, perhaps between the trees, but they were so tall it would be difficult for her, and the rest of the servants were busy with dinner. But then Leona looked towards the camp and a thought came to her mind. "Excuse me, knights, can you help me with the rope?" she asked the young men standing nearby. Their reaction was strange, and the girl quickly realized why. They were from the New Moon Squad. Unlike the other soldiers, they still don't accept her. "What are you standing there for?" A loud cry was heard. Commander Jonathan was hurrying towards them, looking very displeased. "Are you deaf or something?" "The assistant has asked you to stand and stare at her," the commander repeated, and it worked. Before Leona could blink, they had hung everything up themselves. Jonathan kept complaining. It only took a few minutes, so how hard could it have been to help them right away? "We'll talk later in my tent," the commander promised in a stern voice, and the soldiers were seriously scared. Then Jonathan asked Leona for forgiveness. Their leader is a stern man, so the subordinates follow his example, and she is always kind, so he asks to forgive them. "But there is nothing to forgive. Why do you often apologize to me?" asked the girl. Jonathan already felt awkward, but he wanted to apologize for someone else, and Leona noticed his unusual state. "My deputy was rude," the young man began, blushing deeply. Leona froze in surprise and then laughed cheerfully. "So you are the main defender of the squad?" she asked, which made her interlocutor blush even more. In fact, everything was fine and she wasn't offended. But he was worried that Stan did not recognize His Highness. At these words, Jonathan perked up. He doesn't admit it. It seemed like it was a shocking discovery for him. And yet he confirmed the deputy did not mince words at all, but Jonathan swears that he respects the prince and is simply worried about his beloved horse. The commander literally begged the lady to forget about those words, but Leona asked him not to apologize because she was also rude and simply hoped that Stan would not make such a mistake in front of His Majesty. Their conversation was interrupted by loud noise and shouting. Leona and Jonathan hurried back to camp. At the entrance, both froze. A very strange picture opened up before them. Two squads started a fight. What the hell is going on here? Stop what you're doing. That's enough. Jonathan came to his senses after seeing this. But at that moment he was hit and found himself knocked down on the ground. Leona didn't understand what to do and how to stop all this. "Mr. Noel, do you know what happened?" she asked the servant. But he didn't know the reasons, but he knew that the fight was started by the deputy captains, and then the privates, who were trying to separate them, got into a fight. Leona barely had time to wonder if Messrs. Stan and Casey were to blame when a loud scream rang out. "Stop!" Makia's voice had a sobering effect on the fighters. The captain asked what they were doing here and demanded that they immediately stop and line up. "Now let one person explain what this outrage is." Makia walked in front of the line of soldiers. "Apparently you had nothing better to do. Otherwise, how can you explain that you spent your only day of rest like this?" The crown prince was heading towards them. "Somewhere the border is being broken through, the subjects of the empire are dying, and the so-called knights defenders of the country are organizing childish fights. They must have been very bored." "Leona, explain to me what started this nonsense." Carmine turned to the maid. The girl was not embarrassed and said that she would pass on Mr. Noel's words. The squad captains were shocked by this turn of events. Why is the maid telling everything? The instigators of the disorder were the deputy captains, and the prince called them forward. His Majesty gave them a chance to justify themselves. If they have anything to say, they should say it now. Why are we silent? However, during the war, the deputies started a fight among their own, weakening their combat power. "What excuse can there be for this?" the crown prince said. The knights remained silent, fully aware of their guilt. Carmine turned to the squad leaders. Since these were their subordinates, they could decide what to do with those who provoked this. But they only replied that they would submit to the will of His Majesty, and the man thought deeply. In fact, it was quite a serious problem. This should not have happened. They have a war on the doorstep, and soldiers are fighting each other. The crown prince is now representing the emperor. But instead of severe punishment and strengthening discipline, he calmly watches, as if it does not concern him. Come to think of it, the prince has always been like this. Even if his subordinates act out, he will only issue a warning. The ruler should not always be stern, but eternal softness is also unacceptable. All the knights are watching. Does the prince really not have the desire to strengthen his authority? Leona did not understand the course of his thoughts at all. Carmine, meanwhile, was thinking painfully, and his gaze fell on the dejected girl. Leona was also lost in her thoughts, but she felt a gaze and raised her head. "Your Highness," she said questioningly, because the prince was looking at her straight in the eye and smiling mysteriously. "Leona, I give these troublemakers to you. Take them. Let them help with business." The crown prince smiled. The maid asked him what he meant, and Carmine explained that she also worked hard for him. She offered rest for the knights, and now she could relax herself. They would reduce the amount of work she did, and she could boldly order them around. "Your Highness, I am a knight defending the empire. It would be better to demote me than to serve as a maid." Stan was indignant. But the prince felt that demotion was not enough punishment, and it seemed that the deputy did not realize what a misdeed he had committed today. Leona was also discouraged and believed that she, a simple servant, could not command the knights. "Don't worry about that. I, the commander-in-chief, will immediately strip both of them of their ranks." Everyone present gasped in horror. Were they really no longer knights? Carmine repeated that he was entrusting Leona with supervision of them. She would be responsible for their behavior, and that this should not happen again. "This is a temporary request. Distract them until we get to the count. Just let them not hang around underfoot anymore," the prince added in a whisper. And then he turned to the guilty ones, asking whether they would obey his decision, because if they refused, they would immediately leave the army. The prince did not intend to take soldiers who did not obey his orders onto the battlefield. "I obey, Your Highness. I will always follow you, Your Highness." Casey immediately raised his hand enthusiastically, but Stan remained silent, and the prince had to repeat his question for him. "I agree," the knight replied, gritting his teeth, and Carmine exhaled. "Then I will go, captains. Choose acting deputies and find out how many wounded we have," the prince ordered at last. Your Highness, just a moment. They certainly caused a stir, but we will prepare dinner as planned, Leona asked. At the mention of dinner, the soldiers froze, awaiting His Majesty's decision. Carmine looked at his soldiers for a moment, and then reported that the plans had not changed. The maid thanked him sincerely, and the knights' faces showed pure amazement. Casey was beaming with happiness when he was placed at Leona's disposal, but Stan was as black as a thundercloud. I understand that there were some problems, but His Highness ordered a sumptuous dinner, so don't change anything, Leona said to the servant in charge. Now it was time for her to deal with these two big guys. She had no idea what to do with them. His Highness had asked her to keep them in sight, so the girl was thinking of loading them with menial work. But she decided that it was too much to force knights who only knew how to fight to do the work of servants, which would only add trouble, but she needed to exhaust them so much that they would not have the strength to create problems. Mr. Stan, Mr. Casey, she called to the knights. Their reactions were different. Now they are both under her command and must obey her from now on. And His Highness has completely entrusted your fate to me, the girl said with a smile, adding that she was told to watch them for now, and if she said that everything was okay, then they would be allowed to return to duty. In fact, the prince did not tell her this, but the knights did not know this, and were very excited by the opportunity that presented itself. After checking if they agreed, Leona began the task. I give you exactly 2 hours, go hunting. Your prey will become dinner for His Highness and the knights. The girl smiled. She also added that His Highness loved hare meat, but Stan was indignant. Why should he do this? His Highness ordered a sumptuous dinner to be prepared today, but because of your squabble, all the ingredients ended up on the ground. If we leave things like this, the dinner will be meager. But it seems that Mr. Stan, the culprit of what happened, does not care at all, the girl said, upset. Stan snapped that he understood everything and would bring her the game, heading into the forest. You must return within 2 hours. I will check the loot. If everything suits me, you can return to the squad, the girl reminded. Casey was also eager to start the hunt, but Leona asked him to stay. So why did you fight with Mr. Stan, she asked. The knight hesitated, not daring to tell the whole truth, and Leona decided to help him a little. You know, His Highness is very upset by what happened, although he doesn't show it, but he trusts his warriors, especially Mr. Casey. The girl turned on all her acting skills and embellished a little. But since Mr. Casey got involved in the fight, now His Highness is depressed, probably feeling betrayed by the loyal knight he relied on so much. Casey was already scared enough, and Leona applied the main blow. They say you were the one who struck first, but the Master Casey I know wouldn't swing his fists without a reason. The more Leona spoke, the more the knight became stunned. He was talking such nonsense that I couldn't hold back. I was chatting all sorts of things like, His Highness is not the Emperor's child. He said that he doesn't look much like a ruler, the knight blurted out in his own defense. Leona couldn't believe that Mr. Stan was saying such a thing, and Casey asked her to keep it a secret. Stan just muttered it under his breath, even though he doesn't watch his language, but the guy is not bad. Casey considered Stan a real soldier, loyal and honest. And he added that this was probably why it was difficult for him to accept His Highness, because he was close to the former crown prince and was very upset after the sudden death of his former master, and then His Highness immediately took his brother's place. But everything will be fine. Isn't His Highness the one who managed to conquer both me and the knights who served for many years under the former crown prince? There was faith in Casey's voice. Even Stan, he believes, will soon understand the greatness of the current heir. He believes that His Highness is worthy of taking the throne. These words sounded so that Leona calmed down. And I completely agreed with them, because I thought the same thing. The aromas of stew from a large boiling cauldron wafted around the area. Holding back their drool, the knights asked each other if it was true that the guilty couple had obtained the ingredients for the dish. Immediately after the conversation, Casey left and brought 3 hares and 1 boar, and Stan caught 2 deer, showing a good result. By the time the evening twilight fell, the 2 previously distant detachments gathered together. The pleasant aroma of fried meat united them. Enjoying her dinner, Leona was glad that the tension from the fight had subsided, and His Highness also liked the hare. However, raising her head, the girl noticed a man walking away. It was Stan, and Leona wondered where he was going even before she knew it. Without thinking twice, the maid followed him. It seems he came this way, the girl thought, making her way through the forest. And indeed, soon she saw a clearing, and in it Stan, waving a sword. Stan had a nickname, the Mad Swordsman, because of his almost unhealthy obsession with sword fighting and his unusual fencing style. At such a young age, he has shown himself to be excellent as Machia's deputy. His skill is amazing, and such a person has a bad feeling towards the prince. Leona thought that perhaps it was Stan who helped steal His Majesty's secret treaty. She needs to keep a close eye on him. Another 9 days had passed since then, and as they approached the northern border, the temperature dropped. Fortunately, the Crown Prince, as he had promised, allowed the soldiers to rest and have a hearty dinner every 3 days, and the march went smoothly. "How much time do we have today?" The question caught Leona off guard. Turning around, she saw a pleased Casey and a slightly displeased Stan on her days off. She sent them hunting, so now they came to her themselves. "Today you only have an hour. If there is no game, you can just go back, and also, the evenings are much colder now." The girl offered them scarves. Casey immediately wrapped the scarf around his neck, enjoying the warmth, but Stan was in no hurry to accept the gift. "I don't need it. For a soldier, the cold is nothing." With these words he left, not paying attention to the girl's attempts to persuade him. Having asked the knights to return safe and sound, Leona was worried whether everything would be okay. If they were delayed, they would freeze even more. Meanwhile, Carmine was at the council. And just at this time, a messenger sent to Goyard brought a report, upon receiving which the prince warned that upon arrival there in 2 days, it would be necessary to immediately send messengers to the count in order to immediately move to the camp. Calling the commanders over, Carmine suggested that they look at the report together. The Katago tribe has already reached the forest of Tagoya. At present, an army of 6,000 soldiers has been gathered in the city. On the side of the Katago tribe, there are approximately 10,000 warriors on horseback. The number of infantry and cavalry of the empire is included in the said 6,000, while the number of cavalry does not reach even 4,000. The commanders are despondent. The Katago are already in the Tagoya forest. They are advancing surprisingly quickly, and the difference in forces is huge. It seems that they need to ask for reinforcements from other gentlemen. "No, do you understand why I chose the Tagoya forest as the main battlefield?" The prince asked and immediately replied that the Katago tribe relies too much on cavalry. But in the forest, horses will not be able to move quickly. They will become useless. And then they use the terrain to destroy the enemy. "Your Majesty, may I enter?" a female voice rang out. Leona came and brought a thicker coat, as it is very cold today. Carmine refused, saying that he was not cold, and Leona asked him if he really did not feel the cold even in winter in his underwear. And in the middle of the snowy mountains he did not feel the least bit cold, and since this was not so, she insisted that he get dressed. "No, I won't," His Majesty persisted like a child. But the girl asked again. She could barely hold the heavy cloak, so she did not hear, and the man had to agree. What kind of a child is he? Why stubbornly drag a mountain of heavy clothes alone? His Majesty was indignant while the maid helped him change. The prince also inquired about the two, whether Leona had sent them out hunting again, even though he had given her subordinates to make her job easier, and the commanders immediately pricked up their ears as the girl replied that she could not force such excellent warriors to perform her duties. "And they both deeply regret what happened, Mr. Casey. Having learned that you like it, now always brings hares, and Mr. Stan trains with a sword every evening alone," the girl said. She considers them good soldiers, and His Highness himself knows this, so she asks to change anger to mercy. These words of the girl made the commanders think. A couple of hours later, the hunters returned. "Mistress Leona, I came back, tried to catch a hare, but one was too nimble, although I caught a couple." Casey hurried to the girl. Leona asked where Mr. Stan was, and he just came up, but both the girl and the knight were surprised by his appearance. The tall, strong knight was very red in the face, breathing heavily, and sweat was running down his body. He reported that he hadn't caught anything today, but Leona was worried that he was all wet in the cold. He urgently needed to dry off and get some medicine from the doctor just in case. In his usual manner, Stan said that he would go, ignoring the girl's words. Leona hurried to finish her work, because after that she had to visit Mr. Stan. That same night there was a bit of a commotion in the New Moon squad. At such a late hour, His Majesty's assistant was in the detachment, and the worried knights urgently called for Lord Jonathan, acting as deputy. Leona was angry. Stan still didn't go to the doctor, and now she was rushing to give him the medicine. Jonathan just came up to him, and the girl told him the whole situation with Mr. Stan. "Which tent is Mr. Stan?" and Leona asked, and Jonathan pointed to the nearest one. Without ceremony and only saying that she was only going to be there for a minute, Leona opened the tent flap, even though Jonathan tried to stop her. However, what they saw shocked them. Stan was lying in bed and moaning. "I knew it. Mr. Stan has a high fever, Mr. Jonathan. He needs to be given medicine. Please bring some water," the girl asked. She also asked one of the knights to bring a towel and a basin of water and to bring a doctor. "What are you all standing there for? Move faster!" Leona barked at the frozen knights. Everyone began to move, following the assistant's instructions. A minute later, Leona had a glass of water with an antipyretic, and she asked Stan to sit down for a while, drink the antipyretic, and lie down again. The knight was delirious and did not hear her request, but he felt something flowing into his mouth. The noise around him was also very irritating, and the young man could barely open his eyes. To his surprise, he discovered the very same assistant with whom he had always been so harsh. So why is she helping him with such a worried face? After some time, the knights brought a doctor, and he began examining the patient. "You looked after him well. Give him a day to rest and everything will be fine. But if in such cold weather you had left the high fever unattended, complications would have arisen. Fortunately, you quickly noticed this," the doctor reported to his deputy. Captain Makia also came out to the noise, wondering what was going on. He saw the assistant in the knight's tent and wondered why she was there, to which Jonathan told him everything. "I see, that's what it is," Makia said, touched that this girl was taking such good care of Stan. "No, that won't do, Mr. Makia." At some point, Leona turned around with a warlike look, and to the great shock of those present, she asked if it was possible to put Mr. Stan in her bed for the night. They carried Stan into her carriage. The knight needed rest in a normal bed. It would be more comfortable than in a tent. "Thank you very much, gentleman Leona, but where will you sleep tonight?" Jonathan worried, and offered to prepare a separate place for her to rest in their detachment. Leona refused, saying that she knew where she would go. Deep in the forest, on the bank of a river, Nacha was sleeping peacefully. The horse perked up when it heard the footsteps of an approaching man. "Nacha, it's me. Can I sleep next to you tonight?" the girl asked the horse, who was delighted to see her. "Of course," Nacha agreed, and the girl sat down next to the horse, leaning against his hot side. The night was calm, and only with the rays of the dawn sun could quiet steps be heard on the shore. "This damn insomnia. When will I be able to get a good night's sleep?" Carmine asked himself, deciding that he at least had time to take care of Nacha. Having decided that his faithful horse was back at the river, the prince saw Leona on the shore in addition to Nock. The girl was fast asleep, but the horse heard the steps. Raising his muzzle, Nacha told him with a look to quietly get lost. "What a cheeky fellow," thought Carmine. "When he arrives, he makes a scene, demanding refreshments, and then he pretends to be quiet because Leona is sleeping." The man thought about simply waking the girl up, but she was sleeping so soundly that he didn't dare. Feeling something strange in his chest, Carmine decided to leave here, wondering why he was holding his breath. The next morning, Stan finally woke up feeling much lighter and found Jonathan next to him. He could not understand where he was and how he got there, to which Jonathan explained everything to him, that he was in the carriage of Madame Leona, and she ordered him to be moved here because of the heat. The knight was even more surprised when he heard that the assistant had brought the medicine directly to the camp yesterday evening. He seemed to have had a dream about it, but it all happened in reality, and Jonathan added that he absolutely had to thank Mrs. Leona and be extremely polite to her in the future. "Hello, how are you?" Mr. Stan. Leona looked into the carriage. She was surprised to see Mr. Jonathan inside, but was also glad that Stan was already awake. Leona asked if he was feeling better, but the knight did not answer. Then Jonathan, realizing that he was behaving as before, tried to smooth over the awkwardness, assuring him that he was already feeling better and the fever had gone down. The girl was happy about this and asked him not to go out anywhere today and to rest in the carriage, but the stubborn knight did not agree, insisting that it was her carriage and she should ride in it. "Mr. Stan, that's an order," Leona said with a smile. After these words, both men looked stunned. It's not every day that they get orders from a servant. But the girl explained with a smile that they were now under her command, and if they disobeyed, it would be an act of disobedience. Leona went to prepare His Majesty's morning tea, telling Stan to get a good rest as she had ordered, and left, leaving the knight sitting with his mouth open. With a sense of accomplishment, the girl went to perform her direct duties, but stopped when she saw the knights. She was surprised to see people from the New Moon Squad at the cart, but she quickly realized that they were worried about Stan. As she passed by, the knights greeted her very shyly. Good morning, gentlemen knights. The girl was surprised by such friendliness, but still she was flattered. Your Highness, I brought you morning tea. Leona entered the tent where the squad leaders were all ready. It was cold today, so she added lemon to her tea and also offered a cup of tea to Mr. Glenn and Mr. Makia. All this time, without missing a day, she offered Makia tea. Of course, he never accepted it. But Leona intends to continue. Okay, let's go, Makia said suddenly, and everyone froze in amazement. Leona was the first to come to her senses and smile. The day before arriving in Goyard, the members of New Moon finally accepted her. Soon the army arrived in Goyard, straight to the castle of Count Hunt. The master and his subordinates had been waiting for the arrival of the crown prince for a long time. Finally, they saw the empire's battle flag fluttering in the wind. His Highness, the crown prince of the Hamel Empire, had arrived in Goyard. The long journey must have been tiring, Your Highness. I am Hunt Vernier, the ruler of the Hunt County lands, the older man introduced himself. And only then did he dare to raise his head and look at the prince. At the ceremony, he saw him only from afar, and therefore did not notice the enormous pressure emanating from this young man. I am Lord Lloyd, representing the Earl of Bay and participating in the war on his behalf, said the young man standing next to the Earl. Carmine replied that he had received the letter, and to his question whether Count Bay's illness was so serious, the Lord answered in the affirmative, and that he was very sorry that he could not participate. You don't have to explain. Everything is clear. The ruler is not fulfilling his duties, and the residents are suffering. The Lord remained silent at these words of the prince, because everyone understood everything. His Majesty asked Earl Hunt what had become of the matter which he had entrusted to him, and received in reply that it had been completed, and that they had set up camp according to his orders. The prince immediately prepared to set out, but the count hesitated. He thought that his Majesty would at least rest for a day in his castle. No, we are heading to the camp, the prince said firmly. The count thought that everyone was tired from the long march, but the prince was unperturbed, and it wasn't just him. All the soldiers' eyes were shining. It seemed like he was leading the troops superbly. Your Highness, perhaps before we leave we should at least let everyone wet their throats, a female voice rang out, and everyone turned around in surprise. A fragile girl in a man's suit offered His Highness some water as well. There is a woman on the battlefield. Is this really His Majesty's woman? Leona felt the eyes on her and turned around, causing the men to flinch. Hello, I am His Highness's personal servant. My name is Leona. The girl introduced herself with a smile. The Tagoya forest has existed since time immemorial and is surrounded by steep mountain ranges. Only by passing through it can one get to the center of the empire. But because of the centuries-old trees and intertwined thickets, moving through the forest is not easy. The camp was not far, but the path to it was incredibly difficult, so they were able to reach the place only after about 3 hours. The knights began to unload, pleased that they had finally reached their destination. Count Hunt, a female voice was heard, turning around. The man saw His Highness's servant, who was asking if the tent had been prepared for His Highness's guest, Jahan Gun. While the assistant was figuring this out, Viscount Lloyd approached them with a list of military equipment for the camp, which required confirmation from the person in charge. Yes, I'll check everything right now, Leona said, apologizing to the stunned count. Hey, why are you giving the list to the maid? The man pounced on the Viscount as soon as the girl left. Lloyd replied that he had just asked who was in charge of managing the camp's supplies and had been told it was Ms. Leona. Count, I heard here out of the corner of my ear that His Highness trusts this person very much. They say that during the campaign she managed all the internal affairs of the detachment. Even the stern soldiers of the New Moon recognized her, whispered the Viscount. This maid must not cross the road under any circumstances. An hour later, a military council of the Imperial Army was convened. Count Hunt, yesterday I ordered the bridge to be destroyed to prevent the Katago tribe from quickly crossing the river. Since the bridge is destroyed, the enemy will change the route. The way is blocked, so they will choose one of 3 options. Carmine asked for advice which one the enemies will choose. Makia suggested that in order to cross the river, they would head upstream where it was shallower. The river in the Teg forest became shallower to the east, so the catalog would move there. There is a possibility that they will go west. Judging by the movements of the Katago, they carefully studied the area in advance. If they know the features of the forest, they will understand that the western part of the river, although deeper, is much shorter in width, Captain Glenn said in contrast. Carmine nodded. All their opinions were correct, and asked who would speak about the last possibility. But the knights were silent, as were their captains. "There is a possibility that the army will split into two parts," said the prince. "For the Katago, this war is a struggle for power. They are deciding who will be the next leader, and the enemy has two commanders. It cannot be ruled out that the army will move in both directions. But it doesn't matter what choice they make. Our strategy remains the same. We will stab them in the back." After the war council, the crown prince, as promised, allowed Casey and Stan to return to duty. Leona congratulated Mr. Casey, but was unable to do so with all her heart because of the smell emanating from the night. His Highness ordered to mix the earth with the droppings of wild animals and smear it on the clothes, said that for a successful ambush it is necessary to deceive their horses. Casey spoke to the girl from a distance of 5 meters. Deputy Casey was delighted with His Highness's idea, although the smell was terrible. Leona was surprised to see that the soldiers' mood had changed. At the meeting, the Crown Prince announced that he had gathered the army that had been defeated in the fortress of Valfa and placed soldiers in ambush. He had carefully studied the terrain and chosen advantageous positions, devised a strategy to make the tribe's cavalry useless, and even gathered additional forces to attack from the rear. How important is a good leader? That's what everyone thinks about. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a man who approached her. "Mr. Stan, everyone here is sorting out supplies. Do you have some business with me?" Leona asked, and was very surprised when the knight, stumbling and indistinct, said something from which she heard only the word "thank you." Stan, already feeling out of place, turned deep red and became angry. "Don't hang around doing nothing. You might get hurt by accident, and that will cause problems for everyone," Stan suddenly yelled at the girl. Leona was taken aback, and the knight said that that was all he had left. Leona couldn't understand what it was, as couldn't Casey and Jonathan, who became unwitting witnesses. The drawn bowstring glinted in the bright sunlight. His Majesty took a fighting stance, straightening up and preparing to shoot his bow. The knights froze in anticipation, and finally Carmine unclenched his hand, releasing the arrow. The arrow flew out like lightning, making a barely perceptible sound. And it landed right in the center of the target, causing sighs of admiration. "How could you hit it from such a distance? It's hard to believe." "Is there anyone among you who can hit the target in the center from the same distance?" asked the prince. And the answer was silence. The knight's forest of hands and enthusiasm appeared only after the promise to give 10 zlotys to those who got in. An hour later, Carmine stated that only 10 had managed to even hit the target, but he still promised to reward the archers who had stood out. "The successful ones will separate from the main army and set up an ambush in the east," the prince announced to the tired knights. He explained that when the main army began the battle, they would quietly move up the river, survey the enemy forces, find a target, and fire. "The target is their commander. Kill the 13th Hara," the prince stunned the knights. "Only they must not shoot arrows too hastily. It is necessary to hit the enemy when his attention is riveted to the main army of the empire. You are knights, and therefore you know how rare it is to have the chance to become the hero of an entire empire. You can handle it," asked His Highness, and his words hit the mark. That same day after lunch, Leona finished checking the military equipment, and only now the girl noticed that it had become quite noisy in the camp. The group of knights were actively talking, collecting their things, and there was a strange inspiration in the air. The girl informed Mr. Lloyd that she had finished her check, and he replied that it was just in time, as they said the army was soon leaving for the battlefield. "What, already faster than I thought?" Leona shuddered. She bombarded Lloyd with questions about how far the battlefield was, whether the armor and weapons were ready. Carmine approached and asked her not to make noise. The girl asked in confusion whether His Highness was going to go in such a form, to which the young man remarked that he was not going to fight anyway, and the armor would only get in the way. "Don't make a sour face, you're becoming ugly," the prince said to the upset girl. "Come on, forward," called His Majesty, and the horse immediately jumped up at the call. Apparently he was also ready to go. Carmine was ready to climb on his faithful friend, but he passed by him. "Nacha, take care of yourself. Don't get hurt under any circumstances," Leona instructed, stroking the muzzle of the horse that approached her. The couple literally dropped hearts, so Carmine noted with displeasure that Nacha was starting to forget who was boss here. Carmine, offended by the horse's behavior, offered to give him a hellish training session, to which he neighed in displeasure, and Leona sensed their special relationship and smiled. They were interrupted with the report that everything was ready, and the prince ordered them to advance, line up, and march in order. Viscount Lloyd, along with Earl Hunt, remain here as planned, their role being to protect the camp and supply depot. Carmine reminded that they also had one more task and turned to his assistant. "I'll also make sure nothing happens to Mistress Leona." Lloyd added, and the girl almost jumped in surprise. She tried to object, but His Highness was not going to listen. The Crown Prince of the Empire left the camp, going to war. "Take care of yourself," the girl said barely audibly, but this didn't seem enough to her. "Your Highness, you must not suffer under any circumstances," Carmine heard. Since he had already moved quite far away, Leona continued to shout at him to think about his own well-being first and foremost. Mrs. Leona always seemed so unperturbed, apparently. In reality, she was very worried, Captain Glenn noted. Carmine smiled faintly and thought that she must be exhausted from holding back the urge to grumble. "Okay, I will take your request into account. In exchange, you strictly follow my order not to leave the center of the camp," the young man replied. "After all, when he returns, Bartz will report everything about her to him, so she must take care of herself until his return." Towards evening, the servant Edmund returned to the camp and carried out the order to destroy the bridge. Lloyd greeted him and said that he had done a great job, even though the task had been so sudden. The Viscount also reported that His Majesty had already left, and shared his thoughts that the prince turned out to be a man very knowledgeable in tactics, and also suggested going into the tent to tell everything in detail. Edmund tried to refuse, but Lloyd insisted, and the young people headed into the tent. Before they got there, they heard loud arguing. "We can't go any further, Mistress Leona." His Majesty said not to leave the center of the camp, the man said emotionally to the girl, and she was no less emotionally indignant about this. "This is a servant who enjoys a special favor with His Highness," Lloyd whispered to Edmund, who was quite surprised. So loudly that Leona and Bart stopped arguing, realizing that their conversation had unexpected witnesses. "Viscount Lloyd, forgive us. We got carried away talking and didn't notice you approaching," the servants apologized. Lloyd said it was nothing to worry about and introduced his companion, Edmund, who had been away on an important mission and had just returned, a distant relative of Earl Hunt and a recognized genius in the Northwest. Despite the family's high hopes, he postponed his rank exams and went to travel around the continent, and upon hearing of the invasion of the Katago tribe, he volunteered to help the army. Upon hearing this, Leona sincerely said that she was pleased to meet him. The young man froze, mesmerized by the girl's smile, so much so that she thought she had something on her face. Even as he followed Lloyd, Edmund couldn't take his eyes off the maid, and one question was spinning in his head: Carmine and her. A bright ray of sunshine touched the calm surface of the river. "Everything is as they expected. The water here is not poisoned, Rasheen. After all, the invasion of these lands was the right decision," rejoiced the warrior of the Katago tribe, Chahu. Her interlocutor, Rasheen, the 13th son of the chieftain Shertaru of the Katago tribe, reminded her that she was his companion and not just his deputy commander, and therefore should not rush to the front lines. But the girl was indignant. Did he really want her to take care of herself? However, she has the task of bringing them victory, and this is indicated by the tattoo under her eye. This is the sign of a great Gauda warrior. Only one person in the tribe can wear it. The Gauda cannot escape from the battlefield. Chahu was getting angry. Rasheen extended his hand to the girl, asking her to calm down. "Let's go, Chahu." He hugged her for the last time before the start of the war. By midday the next day, the Imperial Army, which had been moving non-stop all night, had reached the headwaters of the river. The soldiers spent the night there, and in the morning, as planned, they began to prepare an ambush. Carmine and his personal guard climbed to the higher ground to make it easier to command the army. Now all that was left was to wait. On the second day after arrival, horsemen of the Katago tribe appeared. They rushed forward, but something was bothering the girl. "Rasheen, wait. I have a bad feeling. We need to gather an advance party," she said, and added that she would go ahead and survey the area. Rasheen reminded her that she was the second in command and couldn't take risks. But the warrior didn't listen. She was the best warrior in the tribe and would be able to spot an enemy ambush right away. Finally, the 13th Har gave in and asked her not to get hurt under any circumstances, because any injury to the Gouda would be a severe blow to the fighting spirit of the warriors. Promising that she would be careful, Chahu directed her horse forward. Everything was calm, but the forest was becoming denser and the horses were starting to get tired, so the army had to slow down. It was strange that the Imperial Army simply destroyed the bridge and retreated. This couldn't be true. They would have to cross the river. No commander would miss such a perfect opportunity for a surprise attack. "Araka, do you smell anything suspicious?" she asked her horse. At this time, the Imperial Knights were indeed sitting in ambush behind the nearby trees. It only took the slightest glimmer of light for Chahu to realize that her premonitions had come true. "Ambush! We've been exposed! Everyone prepare for a clash!" the warrior cried out and spurred her horse. "Imperial bastards, your pathetic plan would never work. We will not fall for such an ambush. I will show you what the Katago tribe is capable of." With a battle cry, she rushed at the enemy. Frightened, the knights of the Empire began to retreat, horror showing on their faces, and the Katago warriors set off in pursuit. "Do you think you can escape from the cavalry? The warriors were going to go to the end." And only Chahu again felt that something was wrong. Why are they running to the plain? The infantry is slower. They understand this, which means they are deliberately luring them. "Wait, don't pursue them," she stopped the warriors. At that moment, there was a deafening explosion. It was a trap. The ground in the center of the Katago tribe's army flew into the air, throwing people and horses around. Rashin, who remained in the distance, heard a cry in the direction where the advanced detachment had galloped off to had something really happened to them. He tried to rush to help, but was stopped by a warrior named Taran. "Har, no Rashin. Don't forget, if something happens to you, our entire army will be destroyed." These words sobered Har. The faces of his comrades are full of determination. Their lives and the fate of their fellow tribesmen are on his shoulders. "Let's wait a little and send scouts across the river." This decision was very difficult for Haru. Meanwhile, Carmine and his army were watching from a height. Hearing the cry, the enemy commander lost his head for a moment, but his comrades immediately calmed him down. The 13th has good subordinates. Besides, the Imperial army was unable to inflict as much damage as expected. That man discovered the ambush and immediately ordered a retreat. One master is worth 100 warriors. "Those who are safe, take the wounded who can walk. Retreat on horses, Araka and I will stay here," Gauda commanded in the heat of battle. "If you die so senselessly, the rest of your tribe will be in despair. You want them to die," she screamed when the warriors refused to leave. She asked them to remember the families who were waiting for them back home. "There is no time to think. Go away," she shouted, and the warriors finally obeyed. The battle continued, and the noise of clashing swords was unbearable. Carmine understood that one man alone was holding their squad back. One warrior provided an escape route for the surviving comrades. And our army, meanwhile, the prince did not finish, but everything was moving towards the fact that the battle would soon be over. It was time to move on to the next stage of their plan. The archers drew their bowstrings and prepared. The very first arrow hit the target exactly, the 13th Hera. It was not a mortal wound, and the Katago warriors had already realized that the archers had set up an ambush, but Rashin refused to leave until Chahu returned. "If we delay, something will happen to you. Then Chahu will blame herself. Trust Chahu a little. Has she ever disappointed you?" These words of the warrior made the Hara think. Chahu had indeed never let him down, was not only a warrior but also an excellent comrade and the best companion. But the warrior's thoughts were interrupted by a frightening, growing sound. Dozens of flying arrows were approaching them. Chahu went with the squad to protect them. If his comrades suffered because of his stubbornness, he would be ashamed to look her in the eyes. Shouting to Chahu to take care of herself, the 13th Har ordered his army to retreat. Carmine lamented that the plan had failed. Their strike force had to retreat. They had failed to kill the 13th Hera. The detachment had been held back by only one warrior, so the main enemy force had left. But one must not let go of the fish that is almost caught. The prince jumped on his horse. Chahu is confident that it is still possible to cope with such a number of soldiers. You just need to seize the moment and escape. She's Gouda, she can do it, but there was something weird. The Empire certainly has many skilled warriors, but the Katago have never found themselves in such a disadvantageous position. Why is their cavalry inferior to some infantry? It was definitely because of the change in their commander, who was their leader. The warriors' thoughts were interrupted by a sharp sound. A rider on horseback rushed towards her, drawing his bow as he went. Is it possible that he shoots a bow from such a distance while riding a horse? The arrow was released and was rapidly approaching its target. Just a few moments later, the arrow pierced the Katago warrior's shoulder. "Tell all of our people that a warrior of the Katago tribe has been captured alive," the rider ordered, dismounting. Chahu watched nervously as he approached her. "This man, who is he?" "I saw that you couldn't even handle one warrior. That's why I came," the prince informed his knights. Looking at the tattoos on the warrior's face, Carmine realized that it was Gouda, a rather valuable fish. Hearing the knights address this man as Your Highness, Chahu realized that this was the man who had recently been recognized as the Crown Prince. Feeling terrible pain, she whispered to her faithful horse to run away, otherwise the enemy would definitely not leave him alive. "You want me to watch you die?" The warrior got angry and hit the horse in the side with her fists. The animal rushed back into the forest. The knights tried to catch it, but it was useless even to try. Grabbing the captive by the hair, the knights asked His Majesty if they should simply kill her. But Carmine answered negatively and ordered the captive to be taken to the camp. On the third day after the prince's army left the camp, news finally appeared. While doing her job, Leona noticed Messrs. Lloyd and Edmund near the gate and asked why they were there. But His Highness was not with them. Could something have happened? However, to Leona's surprise, the knights did not return alone. They were leading a tied-up man from the Katago tribe. It turns out they took a prisoner. They say the returning detachment has an order from His Majesty. "Lady Leona, you will also go and listen," Lloyd asked, and the girl was surprised whether she was allowed to greet. The Viscount hesitated. He didn't think that she was just a servant, but the leader of the returning detachment involuntarily came to the rescue, saying that Madame Leone really needed to hear this. "What happiness, then I'll go," Leona said, and Lloyd and Edmund also exhaled. The returning detachment gave a detailed account of the results of the battle at the river. "Our army set up an ambush on the plain and fought with the army of the 13th Hara. We even tried to kill him, taking advantage of the confusion," the knight said, and Leona was horrified. But she sighed with relief when the knight reported that the attempt had failed. They had missed the Hara and were only able to catch one warrior. In a past life, the prince had made a secret pact with the 13th. Surprisingly, he was now trying to kill him. The captive was particularly fierce. It was not easy to capture her. His Highness came down from the hill and personally took part in the battle. The knight continued. Lloyd remarked that His Highness was incredible, and Edmund wondered where he was and why only part of the army had returned. "That is why I asked Mrs. Leona to listen. We originally planned to return together, leaving only a small detachment. But along the way we noticed that the enemy was trying to ford the river, and a fight ensued," the knight continued. "Therefore, His Highness with the main army again went upstream, and ordered those who returned to bring another end and deliver provisions. Leona immediately jumped up, saying that she would immediately prepare everything and make it so that it would be possible to leave at sunrise." "Mr. Lloyd, the woman is in charge of supply matters, even though she is a servant from the Imperial Palace, but this is a battlefield, and she has other duties," Jonathan asked in a bewildered whisper, which made Lloyd hiss at him, that she was not just some woman, but the closest ally of the one who would soon inherit the throne, and her influence was comparable to that of the Count. And he added to the discouraged Jonathan that he should improve his relationship with her if he was going to enter the civil service. That same night, the assistant checked everything. There were enough warm clothes, so there would be no surprises, but she wanted to check again tomorrow morning. As she walked towards her carriage, the girl heard a strange noise. "This creature is simply a monster. We learned this from her repeated attempts to escape, and yet they shot her with an arrow. His Majesty even had to break her leg," one of the knights shouted, pointing his finger at the captive. Leona realized that the knights were discussing the captive who had recently been captured. She had heard that the warriors of the Katago tribe looked like their horses. Perhaps it was because of their red hair and legs, but she immediately thought of Nacha. "They say that tribes always take cruel revenge for the harm done to them. Maybe to hell with it," the same knight drawled, and he was immediately dubbed a coward. "Convinced? I will show you how brave I am. I will leave this creature a couple of scars to strengthen the ruthlessness of our army." Taking out a knife, he approached the captive. But the warrior looked at him in such a way that the knight involuntarily shuddered. "Why are you staring at me? You're tied up. What can you do? Let's see if you'll stare like that when they cut off your ear." The knight got angry. He swung but was stopped by a stern shout. Turning around, he saw Madame Leona, who said that although she did not understand military matters, she knew that an ordinary soldier could not torture a prisoner without permission. "What is your name? I cannot afford not to know the name of the man who dared to torture a prisoner captured personally by His Highness." There was steel in the girl's voice. She again ordered them to tell her the name, but the soldiers remained silent, shocked by this turn of events. Only after a few moments did they realize that they had done wrong and humbly asked to be forgiven and pardoned, to which the assistant promised to pretend that she had not seen anything only because they had just returned from a difficult battle, but there would be no second time. "Disperse immediately," Leona ordered the knights, and they immediately scattered. Left alone, the girl turned to the captive. "I'm sorry. Even though you are a prisoner, it was too much." "I'm sorry how you feel," the girl asked, noticing that she didn't look very well. Noticing the blood, Leona asked if they hadn't even given her first aid, and in response received a rude and incomprehensible phrase. She realized that the captive did not understand the imperial language, but she could not leave things like that, so she promised to bring a doctor. With these words, the girl left, and the captive remained, wondering who this strange woman was. Leona immediately found a field doctor and asked him to treat the captive's wounds. But by the time they arrived, the warrior was no longer moving and had lost consciousness. Trying not to disturb the captive, the doctor, with Leona's help, treated the wound on her shoulder. First aid was given. The wound was deep, but everything would be fine. The Katago tribe was famous for its good health, which made Leona feel relieved. But this is the first time I see a female warrior. This is impossible in the Empire, the healer noted. At that moment, Leona was overcome by a strange feeling. As if she had already heard about this warrior, her heart began to beat wildly. The doctor also noticed an unusual pattern on the captive's face. Most likely this is not even a drawing, but writing, possibly a name. "It's a title," a third voice said, and Leona turned around. She was surprised to see Mr. Edmund and asked if he could read the Katago script, to which the man replied that he was interested in many things, and on the face of the captive was a title that meant a great warrior. Such script must be earned by passing an extremely dangerous test in his tribe. It bears the name of Gouda. At the last word, Leon felt as if he had been struck by electricity. In her past life, when the crown prince was overthrown, the empire fell into decline, and the Katago tribe began their raids again. At that time, she was taking care of the emperor's grandson and did not pay much attention to the state of affairs in the empire, but she remembered one name that was especially often mentioned at court. A foreign warrior with a severed ear and a face covered in scars. Her very appearance was terrifying. She was called the Gouda demon. They said she hated the empire so much that she did not leave a single blade of grass on imperial soil. "What happened? Some kind of problem?" Edmund asked, noticing how the girl turned pale, but she reassured him that although they were enemies, the captive commanded respect. Contrary to rumors, this woman has both ears in place and no large scars on her face. Today, Leona's intervention changed the fate of Gouda, but what consequences will this entail as long as the crown prince does not have problems? Only now did the girl realize that she was increasingly changing history, and that soon she would have to face an unknown future. The next morning, the captive opened her eyes with difficulty, feeling something wet on her face. "Ah, have you come to your senses?" Leona asked, wiping her face with a towel. Chahu jerked involuntarily from shock, and then immediately felt a wave of pain. "Be careful, otherwise all the work on the treatment will go down the drain. I took off the chains because they only made it worse. But you need to sit still, otherwise you won't get better," Leona explained. By the way, Gouda, at the mention of her title, the warrior again flinched in fear, and this strange woman explained that her friend had told her about the writing on her face and asked if she could call her Gouda. "Gouda, you are in the army of the 13th Hara. You are close to him," Leona asked, but the captive did not answer, although she grew gloomy with every word, and the girl decided that she did not understand the Imperial. In this case, the assistant asked her to wait a little. She would bring food. "The devil," came the cry as Leona left. At the same time, the entrance to the camp was not entirely calm. "Isn't this His Majesty's horse? Why is he wandering around here alone?" The knights were surprised when they saw the stately animal outside the camp. One of them volunteered to inform Mr. Lloyd, telling his partner to bring the horse inside in the meantime, but he was afraid, because only His Majesty and the assistant lady could touch this horse. While the knights were arguing and almost fighting, the horse calmly walked past them straight into the camp. The captive was still trying to loosen her bonds when she heard a quiet snort. "Araka, why are you here?" The warrior was surprised when the horse leaned his head against her. "The soldiers are guarding the gates. Didn't anyone stop you?" She tried to speak quietly, but those same knights had already noticed them. They saw Nacha together with the captive, but they were afraid that if she touched the horse, they would be in trouble, so they decided to take the horse away. "Good start. You can't be there. Come here." The youngest knight held a carrot in his hands and shook with fear. And then he made the main mistake in communicating with an animal. He approached it from behind, for which he was punished with a powerful blow, so much so that he himself flew in one direction, and the knife that fell from his bosom in another. While the knights were coming to their senses, Chahu noticed the knife and exchanged meaningful glances with Arak. The horse immediately understood everything. "Mrs. Leona, Please calm Nacha down. Leona heard the cry and was surprised that the horse had arrived without his highness. But only Nacha arrived, and he was so excited that it was impossible to calm him down, so the help of an assistant was really needed. The girl headed to the place as quickly as possible and indeed saw Natch standing next to the captive. "Why are you there? Come here, Nacha," Leona called to her horse. However, as soon as the animal turned around, she realized her mistake. It wasn't Nacha. His eyes and mane were different. It definitely wasn't Nacha. Leona began to back away, while the horse, on the contrary, moved towards the girl. "Sorry, woman, you'll have to get some sleep." There was a dagger at her throat, and something heavy fell on her head, losing consciousness. Leona thought that Gouda did know Imperial after all. "Why is it so noisy? They told me that Nacha is back," Lloyd asked happily and stopped short. The captive was no longer tied up. Moreover, she herself had taken Lady Leona captive, and the knights around her drew their swords. "Stop! Take the soldiers away. If you come closer, this woman will die," the warrior warned. "But if they open the gates immediately, she will leave this woman alive." The Imperials were in no hurry to carry out her order, and Gouda easily ran the tip of the knife across the snow-white skin, which immediately had an effect. Having now thrown her captive onto the horse, the warrior climbed on herself. "If you follow me, I will really kill your woman, that's how it will be," the warrior turned around. Then she galloped away, leaving the Imperials perplexed. "Mr. Lloyd, they say the prisoner has escaped, and Mrs. Leona has been captured. What is going on here?" Jonathan hurried to the knights. But the Viscount was not himself and only repeated that he was dead. "Come to your senses, Mr. Lloyd. The prisoner must not be lost. We must immediately send a pursuit," Jonathan shouted. But he was worried that Mrs. Leona would die, but he was still convinced that it was not so important. They were now on the battlefield, and what happened must be reported to His Majesty immediately. While the Viscount and Lloyd were deciding what to do next, only Bartz stood in horror, worried about his kidnapped assistant. But there was another witness to this incident, unnoticed by anyone. A hooded figure purposefully left the camp and went into the forest. 13th Har. "Information has just been received that Chahu has escaped," they reported to Rasheen. In addition, the warrior also kidnapped someone important from the enemy camp. They were worried that they had lost, but now they are in a winning position. "Chahu will probably try to cross the river to join us," Rasheen said happily, guessing that since the upper reaches of the river were guarded by an enemy army, she would climb the eastern mountain and go around. And he ordered to meet her on the way. Leona woke up to the bright sunlight and didn't understand where she was. The girl sat near the tree for a while, remembering the events of the previous day. Seeing the Gouda nearby, the girl asked why it was there, and immediately remembered that she had lost consciousness from a sudden blow, lamenting that she had been so careless that she had not been able to dodge the blow. "You don't look away, as I understand it. You are a servant, but you have more courage than your soldiers. You are not afraid of me?" the warrior asked in surprise. Leona sincerely replied that she was horrified, but since she had brought her here and was just looking, she was not going to kill her immediately. "That's right, I'll need you. I'm not going to kill you now," Gouda confirmed, and then threw Leona an apple, offering her a snack. Chahu herself also bit into the fruit, adding that if she didn't trust it, she didn't have to eat it. Leona couldn't find anything to say. She just looked after this amazing woman. To run away in such a state, she is an amazing person. Such a warrior probably tried to run away in her past life. I wonder if she succeeded, or if it didn't work out that time and she escaped this time because of Leona's intervention. If so, what impact will this have on the war? But there is no point in thinking about what you don't know, and now there is no time to weigh and think everything over. Now she needs to do what she can. First of all, she must survive.